The slop waters have died down for the moment. The NBA offseason is mostly tentatively in pencil in the books. So let's go through and figure out which teams changed their stars. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This, I believe, is episode number 208, right around there. My last episode, I believe, was kind of a bonus episode that was recorded pre-draft, released post-draft, with my guy Ignacio Risotto, who's over at No Ceilings. He is a premier international scout. And we a while ago had recorded a monster, like unwieldy 3-hour episode on Sarr, Risache, Salon, Dadier, and Juan Nunez. And he went into his background with each of those 5 guys and talked about how they could come to shape and define the 2024 draft class. And that was sort of a last final primer into Summer League. Now it's time to talk about who will shape the 2024-2025 NBA season and beyond. Because even though this offseason has been a little strange so far with spurts of activity and inactivity, I'm excited to talk about it. It is second apron summer, and who better to talk about second apron summer than the Bartleboys of the Uniball Discord, Patreon, podcast empire, TrillBroDude, and making his Chucking Darts debut, Sam Sheehan. Welcome, my friends. How are you?
Thank you so much for having us. I mean, I've often said that it was gonna be a second apron summer, a Chet Hanks style. That you've heard of White Boy Summer. Here's second apron summer. And we're here to show out. Both Trill and I, for those of you who are doing audio only, we're only wearing aprons.
Yep.
Chuck,
Yeah.
well, had some questions for us, but this is just how we podcast. We're very comfortable in that. So,
well, I mean, given your enthusiastic endorsement of all things Bartlestein, an apron is really more clothed than you've appeared in the past on your feed. So I'll take the wins where I can get them, Sam.
Yeah, this is we're doing a little I'm dipping my toe into the, let's say, OnlyFans style of things. So just I found a way to kind of branch out and sort of advertise to a new audience. So I really appreciate you giving me that opportunity.
Of course. With your podcast reach, y'all do a good job with a fair number of people, but once you get into the niche, like real scummy draft waters that this podcast swims in, you really get a whole new brand of freak that you can cater to. So
yeah, it's really gross, to be honest, and I'm so glad that we get to be here and cook up some slop live on air for the true sickos that do listen to this pod. Because it is funny, whenever you come on to the podcast, it's always like, all right, we're gonna have Chuck on and we'll talk for an hour and a half. The last time Chuck came on, he wasn't on for the whole time, but we talked for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Just to let you guys know. So check that out if you haven't already. The Mega Board episode with Chuck and
then Max, right?
Maxwell from No Ceilings was one of our favorites of the cycle. So I'm glad that we had our draft season. I'm glad we had our off season. I'm glad it's calmed down a little bit now.
Yeah, and I was saying it before we started recording, I'm very proud of you guys for going as hard into this of all drafts. If you can make it through this one with the level of endurance and enthusiasm that you all did, then every other draft cycle will seem like a breeze. You will be floating.
These are the most fun, in my opinion.
Oh, where everyone disagrees and no one knows what the hell to do. I agree with you, but still, yeah.
It's way more fun to know. I'm of the opinion that it's like way more fun to just be doing shit like, okay, I don't like that Matas Buzelis struggles with threes. I'm gonna put him 27th on my and everyone can yell at me about that. For like a whole like draft site. Like Kevin is still doing it. Kevin's still mad at me because
he's been balling out in Summer League.
He's been balling out in Summer League, which obviously means there's no way he can fail as a pro. There's no way this will come back to hurt Kevin.
Yeah, I like Modest and I like the flashes he's shown in Summer League. My guy still has like 1 assist through 3 games. So I think like there's Hooper. That's right. That's right.
That's always what you want from an NBA role player is high usage, and not a lot else.
Yeah.
Good defense though. Defense has been good. So
Very interesting guy. We'll see if he's a 4, if he's a 5, how many minutes he ultimately gets. I mean, we'll probably touch on the Bulls, but let's leave that for deeper in the episode. If anyone is sick enough to want our thoughts on the Bulls offseason, then they're sick enough to wait for it. So the structure of this episode is going to be, we are each going to pick 3 teams who we think change their fortunes the most this offseason, the ones who will come to define it and whose franchises are most affected by it. And that can mean whatever the 3 of us want it to mean, which teams that we've selected. But I wanted to kick it off to Sam first, just in case Sam has a bit of an early out. He says he's good for about an hour and a half, which by Trill and my standards is an early out. So Sam, you go ahead. Which team popped to you the most as having changed their ultimate, like, I guess, just destiny based on the 2024 offseason?
I feel like there is one team that's kind of head and shoulders above the rest, like in terms of being like very obvious. And then I think it's kind of arguable after that point. But the team that I think by far, like just in terms of like picking a direction and everything, I think the Brooklyn Nets really changed everything about themselves this offseason. Now, it's a little bit of one of the big things Trill and I have talked about a billion times on our episode is about how like it's really easy to win trades when you're selling. Like when if you're just trying to be bad, if you're trying to tear it down, any GM, that's a great way to buy yourself like 5 years of being a GM of an NBA team is to just orchestrate a studs teardown when you take over the team. But it has to be like at the right point in time. And like, but I feel like the Nets should get credit for this because, they are in a little bit of a weird situation. They're in New York. The Knicks are obviously way more popular. They had a real chance to kind of grab the belt from the Knicks, and then all the weird stuff happened with like the Kyrie Harden team.
Yeah.
They rebuilt themselves and this is a Nets team that like really has not like ever drafted well ever, and has never really had draft picks. Like they've always been kind of like almost Three Stooges, like stumbling and bumbling into like various disasters. But because they're a kind of a New York team and they've like always had like owners and like GMs that have kind of been willing to go for it, they have like had these like, finals teams. They had that Nets team that like it's probably the best team that's never gonna like make a finals or even a conference finals. And it's just one of the weirdest like things. But that team like probably should have won a title if they were able to kind of keep that together without it getting weird. Um, and I think it would have been Joe Tsai is an owner who wants to win. Right now, it seemed like they were going to hold on to Mikal Bridges, they were going to hold on to Cam Johnson, hold on to all these guys way past their draft value, like the Toronto Raptors kind of did 2 years ago when they kind of waited a season too long to start their teardown. And instead, they pull off one of the biggest trades of the offseason, one of the biggest trades from a draft pick perspective, like ever. To ultimately trade a guy who is a very good player, plays at a position of strong need, but is ultimately probably like a top 40 player in the league, for probably somewhere in that range, and got 5 first-round draft picks for him. This is also a great time to sell because there's not a lot of like truly bad teams in the NBA right now. Everyone is like kind of trying to win. Even the Detroit Pistons, who are terrible, are still trying to kind of win right now. It's really just like them and the Wizards are the only teams that are like actively kind of trying to lose. So there's real estate to find, especially coming into a good draft. They had obviously all their picks out the door. They made some trades with those Suns picks with the Rockets to get their own draft picks back and have a real shot to have a really good draft pick and come home with a Cooper Flag, with a Boozer, with one of these really strong draft picks here in the coming drafts, and kind of kickstart their rebuild. And I think that if a Nets team that is a big is ultimately in New York, and they can kind of get a couple of like these really good young guys, get at least one of these guys a true blue chip star, they're going to have guys that are still willing to come to New York even after the KD Kyrie thing did not pan out. And there's like a pretty good chance this team could be right back into being very, very competitive in like 3 or 4 years. If they nail a couple of these draft picks. So I that is by far my pick. I think that they did a great job. Hats off to them. And I think that they really seized this moment and read the tea leaves correctly. Like, let's be bad right now and let's kind of get ourselves out from under this disastrous James Harden trade.
Just real quick here.
Go for it. Yeah.
We have, weirdly enough, we have like a weird contingent of Nets fans that follow the podcast. Because about 2 years ago, obviously there was the James Harden, Ben Simmons saga. And a bunch of them started listening to my podcast at the time because it was, they were just interested in that. And one of the things that, as we've learned to get to know Nets fans more, is that they've wanted this for a while. Like, they've never had a true rebuild, like Sam said. If you think about the best picks in Nets history, like recent history, they've had Kenyon Martin, who made one All-Star team. They've had Brook Lopez,
we're
who
starting at Kenyon. Oh God, this list must be depressing.
If you want to go back a little bit further, arguably I think the only Nets draft pick in their NBA history, if I remember correctly, to make an All-Star team in the NBA, not the ABA. I'm sorry, to make an All-NBA team was Derek Coleman in the 90s, made a third-team All-NBA. So you have Derek Coleman, Kenyon Martin, Brook Lopez, who made an All-Star team, and then if you want to go a little bit deeper, you have like your Jared Allens, your Derek Favors, those kind of guys. So Jared Allen did not make an All-Star team for the Nets. So I just want to point out the fact that those are the greatest players that they've drafted in the last 30, 35 years. And if you flip that on its head, where the Nets are always the team trading away their picks, you can essentially build a team of Hall of Famers with the picks that they have traded away. Damian Lillard in the Jared Wallace trade. Draymond Green was famously a second-round pick. That was a Nets pick in the 2012 draft, also the same draft as Damian Lillard. And then also obviously Jason Brown or Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, which is ad nauseum talked about all the time. And more recently, our guy Reed Shepherd, this past draft, already called it right now. He's a Hall of Fame lock.
That's right.
Because of this trend.
Yeah.
But well, I know Nets fans have been wanting this for a while, so I'm happy for them that they were able to kind of sidestep what they were viewing as headed down this path of mediocrity for the second time. And the only thing that's worse than being mediocre or bad is being mediocre or bad without your own picks. So I think that they're happy to be back in a position where they control a little bit more of their own destiny. They have this ability to then now have the most first-round picks in the NBA, and they can do a proper rebuild.
And let's just say exactly what these picks are. They are 4 Knicks picks, all unprotected, 25, 27, 29, 31. And then this next coming draft in 2025, they get a top 4 protected pick that belongs to the Bucks. So it's a bet against the Bucks, and the Bucks have their own weirdness. They might come up in this conversation, they might not, but one injury to a superstar who kind of almost tore his Achilles towards the end of the year last year, and that pick becomes a lot more interesting. Look, the Nets are very good at building contenders. It just tends to be other teams that they help building, whether that's the Celtics or that's trading Kyrie to the Mavs. I mean, that was the finals matchup last year, or, trading, I don't even remember now. Yeah, Harden went from Brooklyn to Philadelphia. I got to get that right. This is stuff that
game 7 in the second round is the closest thing you can get for the Sixers to being a contender. So,
well, I'm sure the Sixers are going to come up in this conversation. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I agree that this is a good pick. Like y'all said, it is easy to win trades when you're selling, but it's also, the debate around that trade has to be about whether or not the Knicks gave up too much, not whether or not the Nets got enough. They very clearly got enough and more. Another thing about them is that they're one of the very few teams in the NBA that is not really committed to a young point guard. Cam Thomas is there. Cam Thomas has talent, but I think the people in the Nets organization would tell you they're not like really committed to Cam Thomas as their guy running everything.
Well, for
And
next year they are to help them get Cooper Flag, but
of course,
Yeah.
but
Jordan
that
Poole sleeper agent style
Yeah.
tank commander. Cam Thomas, you will shoot 20 times next year, every game. Let's go.
see, but here's the thing: whether or not that was the Wiz's intent with acquiring Jordan Poole, there seems, and maybe I'm just a sentimental dart chucker, but the way that the Wiz talk about Jordan Poole now, the way that their GM has talked about him is like he almost teared up. And unless he's a phenomenal actor, it seemed genuine enough to me. He teared up talking about how Poole has really accepted the responsibility of being a leader on this team. There were shots of him and Bilal at some, international football match over the summer. Like, it seems like the Wiz at least like Jordan Poole enough to want him to be a part of their future, enough so that they aren't going to be quick to just trade him again and just dump him for whatever point guard comes along. And that's my point with Brooklyn, is that there is a really a surplus of good point guard sized players in the NBA. That's what happens when the league runs on wings. And in Chicago, for example, where they've acquired Giddey and they still have Kobe White, who is good, who I love, who's on a phenomenal contract. In a couple of years, Kobe White's going to come up, and maybe Donovan Mitchell will say he wants to go to Brooklyn. Maybe he won't be. But the version of that kind of a player, someone like Kobe, who's could join and play off of a stud that they get at the top of the 2025 draft, Brooklyn will be there as an attractive option for someone like that. It's not just about stars choosing you. It's about good young players who the market is squeezing because not enough teams know how to navigate these aprons. And you can say, we have cap room. We will compensate you. Come join our team. That's, I think, a downstream benefit of tearing down to the studs right now. Because, this summer in the short term is defined by all of these players, or not all of these, but like Gary Trent Jr. turning down $15 million a year. Sam, your favorite player, Caleb Martin, turning down the same. I mean, like it's about guys, all of us. Now the Pelicans can't trade Brandon Ingram because too many teams are apron to hell, and Brandon's contract is too unwieldy and they don't want to pay the tax and get into the first apron. Like, the transactions don't move as smoothly as they have been for the last several years because the Nets are going to be this sort of oasis for players and agents and teams who want to dump contracts. They can all of a sudden get a little bit more choosy than I think that role has been in the past, which is just like, if you have a bad contract, send it to us. But in the past, the assumption has always been no matter how bad the contract, you can always move it somewhere. That is not as much the case anymore. And that's where I think the Nets have a little bit of additional leverage.
Yeah, I mean, they've got Ben Simmons will be coming off the books here at the end of this year. They re-signed Nick Claxton to like a fine NBA deal, one that he's going to be able to, you might not get like positive value for Nick Claxton on it, but you'll be able to move him and trade him, and you can hold out until you get that. So they're going to have like $60 million kind of coming and going. Into your point, Chuck, like there's not going to be a lot of teams are going to be more willing to pay a heftier price. I mean, we were already seeing it. The Bulls were reportedly wanted to attach a pick to send Zach LaVine to teams. Like, that's what we're talking. Zach LaVine's a good player, but like he's just, his contract is huge. So that's kind of, where we're at. And I think that the Nets very wisely figured that out. Like, a lot of these bad teams are kind of capped out. The Raptors, they're not going to be a very good team again this year. Like, they might sniff, like at the high end, they might sniff the play in, but like they don't have any playoff destiny, and they just what did they sign quickly to? A $35 million a year
flat for 5 years. Yeah,
that's like that's different. That's like more money than LeBron was making in 2010. Like, and part of that is just that, like, that's just part of it, is that the cap is just going up like this. But like, to your point though, a lot of these times the Supermax has also kind of squished the available money because these young guys are getting into their 35% maxes earlier, and that creates less money than there used to be. Because before the Supermaxes, everyone was on the same thing. You were on a 25% max from years 1 to 6. You were on a 30% max from years 7 to 9. and 10 plus was when you got 35. And back in the day, you probably usually weren't that good of a player past year 10. Like the LeBron James and the Al Horfords are kind of a new thing. A lot of times guys were not that good for very long. So this is kind of a new thing. And I think that teams are going to have to really be thinking about contracts a lot more. And I think the Nets, to your point, Chuck, really well positioned to take advantage of that, not only this year, but like in the coming years.
And just to point that out and just name some other names, because when you talk about the teams, it's like, how are they going to pay all these guys down the road? Could Lou Dort be available in 2 years? Could Jalen Green or Alperen Şengün be available next summer? What about Jaden Ivey? What about Benedict Mathurin? We can quibble with all these different kinds of guys.
What about Jonathan Kuminga, who is going into with a team that seemingly is kind of undervaluing him throughout his career so far? Once he apparently wants $200 million. I highly doubt the Warriors are going to be diving headfirst into that. Like, and that's a player that, like, I think a lot of people, like, I've never been the highest on Kuminga, but it's undeniable how talented he is as a scorer and just his general athleticism and kind of what you always talk about, these potential for these kind of two-way forwards and how important they are for when you reach the higher levels of the playoffs. But as we've seen with some teams, like, I mean, I think the Knicks got out ahead of this. The Knicks saw what was coming with quickly and said, we're not paying him this much money. And if he demands that, or if a team throws a bag at that in free agency, then we're screwed because we either have to match it or let him walk for nothing. And they very smartly got ahead of that, got off the RJ Barrett contract. And yeah, they're overpaying OG Anunoby, but OG also fits the exact mold that we're talking about. And they have a bunch of other bargain contracts on the books right now, so they can afford to get away with this kind of thing. So my point on that was just kind of like, Kuminga is a guy that, like, if you had told me, 6 months ago that we would be talking about Kuminga potentially getting traded, I would have been like, I know at the time there was buzz about that because he was not happy with his role. But after the way that he finished the season, I would have been surprised considering his age and his production and all that. So,
yeah. And I think in the past, a team like the Nets, for a player like Kuminga, would be used as like pure leverage. Like, you better give me what I want or the Nets will. Yeah. And then the Warriors be like, well, let's, hold our nose and pay him and then figure it out later. But we are entering a new world where figuring it out later is not really a viable option, with the fact that your draft pick goes to the end of the first round and you can't aggregate players and trades. Like, the avenues are just going to be limited. So these leverage spots it's going to be attractive enough for someone that I just listed in that list of players. And there's more sprinkled throughout the league. There's more who think they're going to get paid, but may not get paid, except by a team like the Nets. And if they're shrewd and they're patient and they have a real purpose about how they want to build their team, then they'll be able to get someone very, very good. And so I think they are a very fine pick. Any more thoughts on them? Yes.
Just real quick. One, if I were a team right now and I were looking at the net situation and everyone seemed like, look, Lauri Markkanen's a great player, but it's going to be an arm and a leg to acquire him. Like, they want Podziemski and they want all these picks and swaps from the Warriors. If you're the Warriors, why don't you just go to the Nets and pay a third of what you would pay to get Lauri Markkanen and go get Cam Johnson? Like, yeah. I know it's not one for one as a player. Obviously, Lowry's better. Obviously, he's bigger. He's a better rebounder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I just feel like Cam Johnson is a guy that's being a little bit undervalued because maybe the perception of his contract is that it's a bit too much. But I actually think if you look at the calculations in terms of like the percentage of the cap that he makes up, it's still a very low amount. It's like actually a very reasonable contract. He makes just over $20 million a year. And he's a guy that, he's like 6'7", 6'8", good team defender, can really shoot the hell out of the ball. He's pretty athletic, not like for a wing, he's not like super athletic, but he's fairly athletic. He can get to the rim. And we've seen him be a part of winning teams, like when he was on the Suns. And I wonder what his market looks like and what kind of teams could go after him, because he's the last guy that's potentially tradable until, Claxton later. That is really interesting to me, more so than like Dorian Finney-Smith or Dennis Schroeder or whoever else they have on their roster. So I'm interested to see what happens with Cam Johnson and if someone can pry him away, whether it's now or at the deadline, because I actually think He's squarely in the middle of his prime. He doesn't make that much money. He's cost controlled, and he's a good player. And I mean, look, I don't think he's a great defender, but he can make an offense a little bit more dynamic, I think, with his spacing and his ability to get downhill. And then he at least has some value on the defensive end as a help, as a weak side, like defender and help defender in general.
Yeah, and like a non-target. Like you're not going to go.
Yes,
right,
he's big enough and he can move enough. He's not great on the ball if you're having him defend point of attack, but that's why a team like the Warriors would be interesting to me, because he would not be doing that at all. So I kind of think that Cam Johnson should have more of a market than he does right now, based on everything that we've heard.
Yeah, I think in his case with Golden State specifically, first of all, he's a great fit for Golden State because of how much they value. I mean, you could plug him into a lot of what you had Clay doing, and he can at least be a facsimile. But I think because you have Wiggins and Kuminga on that team already, and they are very valuable because the Warriors tend to skew small when they play their lineups, you need those two big, or you need a power wing on the floor to handle tough defensive matchups. My guess is Wiggins would have to come back in that trade, and then the Nets could like demand real pick value, because it's now you're comparing it to what you can get for Cam Johnson elsewhere, and you probably can get a pick or two for him elsewhere and not take back someone who is at sort of the nadir of their value like Wiggins is. So they could really try to squeeze the Warriors if they did that. And I don't know if if the Warriors think we're dipping into our chest of picks, I don't know how stacked they are. But if they're dipping into their chest of picks to acquire Cam Johnson, they might view that as opportunity cost to get a star with the full boat. Like, in other words, if they get Cam Johnson, they can't get Markkanen, because now all of a sudden they don't have quite enough to get there, unless I guess they're to trade Podziemski and Kuminga.
Yeah,
and
that's what I just.
But it's an interesting calculation for sure.
I don't really get why a team would want to, after what we just saw Bridges go for. I don't know why you would want to negotiate with Danny Ainge. Like, it just feels like a losing proposition to me. And like, look, if they add Lowry Markkanen, will they be talented? Will they be a very good team? Will they make more sense? Yes, absolutely. I don't think they're one of the three best teams in the West.
It's a debate. I think they'd be good, but it's a debate.
I think they'd be good. I also think that right now, where I would just be a little bit more realistic for where they're at. Like, I wouldn't be overpaying for whatever star. And honestly, like, if I know they need like a second scorer and they need a guy, it might be a little bit reductive just in thought, because I know the Warriors system functions a little bit differently than most other teams across the league. But like, I kind of think I don't think they need a Brandon Ingram type, but I think that they do need a little bit more of an on-ball juiced up creator, more so than a Lowry Markkanen just in general. Like, maybe Lowry fits perfectly and I'm wrong, and they just need his size because they've been so small, and because he can rebound, he can do some of the rim protection stuff. He could, he can fill in that Clay role like you were talking about. But I kind of view the Warriors as like the thing that they've lacked recently, the last few years, is like a dynamic on-ball scorer, and the last time we saw them have that was Jordan Poole, and they won the finals. So,
I mean, I don't know. They won the finals, any thanks to Jordan Poole in that series specifically, but
he was.
I think they were courtside baddies. He saw the courtside baddies, and it was over. So.
Is that when that's from? That's from that series.
Yeah, it's from game one.
Yeah. Well, and Boston won game one. So I mean, but I would think that they think that
game two,
Pods, that Pods would become that guy. But Danny, I've said this on your podcast long ago, Trill, about Pods or Danny and his hard-nosed guards who played in the Northwest. It's hard for him to give it up. So
he loves it.
Yeah, he does. Who's your team, Trill? Your first team?
Well, let's just get it out of the way. We can talk about the Sixers, because I think there were a few teams that made some pretty big moves that we've talked about kind of ad nauseum on our podcast. But since I am a Sixers fan, obviously the Sixers got the best player to change teams in free agency. I mean, probably since 2019, we went through it. At the time, we didn't know Jalen Brunson would become
free agency. Sorry,
yes,
excluding trades.
I mean,
okay.
Because we didn't know Jalen Brunson would become Jalen Brunson at the time. Like, I think we all thought Jalen Brunson was very good, and we all thought that he could have some untapped potential on the Knicks. but I don't think that anyone saw him becoming, a first or second team All NBA level talent. And at the time, Paul George is a guy that, made the All-Star team last year, still one of the best two-way wings in the NBA, despite some of the playoff flaws. Elite catch and shoot guy, still has some juice on defense. A really great secondary third creator that you can throw onto a Sixers team that is really just been lacking that archetype of player since they lost Jimmy Butler. Obviously, they're very different kind of players, but just a wing that can, that can hang on defense, that is, you can throw him the ball and he can create offense for himself and potentially for others. And I think a great connecting piece between the Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid star duo. And, look, for where the Sixers were at a year ago when they traded James Harden, and I was, kind of I was just upset with the idea of this cap space plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the Sixers have never, ever, Paul George is by far the best free agent they've ever got. And also to land someone who's such a good fit and to not really think about all these financial implications with the new CBA and all of that. The fact that the front office saw this from a year ago and said, this is going to happen and we're going to be able to steal someone was really forward thinking. And it was something that, they kind of owned me on, to be completely honest. I didn't think the plan would work at all because of the Sixers history. I didn't think that it made any sense to, since stars don't change teams in free agency, I didn't think the plan made any sense in general. Guys will just take their bags and then, ask out later if they're upset. And it turned out about as perfect as you can, especially considering the fact that they were also able to then go get Caleb Martin at what I perceive as a discounted rate. Obviously, he was offered more from the Heat, turned that down, and then had to accept a smaller contract from the Sixers. So to come out of the offseason with Paul George, with giving up no assets, still having 4 tradable first-round picks, they were able to use their picks in this draft and not give up any, get Jared McCain in the first round. And then from there, also bring in Caleb Martin and, bring back most of the core that they had from last year, except for Tobias Harris, DeAnthony Melton, and Buddy Hield. Buddy obviously didn't work. DeAnthony has the back, and then Tobias, we've upgraded him to Paul George. So that is, we put it in, this is another one that we put in our S tier in terms of the offseason when we ranked it. And
a great podcast, by the way. I encourage everyone to check that out.
Thank you. But yeah, so I feel about as good as you possibly could, even though I don't think the job's finished. And I think they'll still make another move either this offseason or more so probably at the next deadline.
So, and Sam, I'll kick it to you in just a sec. I just want some clarity though, Trill, because this is certainly a great job by the Sixers with what they had in terms of that cap space. You mentioned earlier, the closest they've been to a contender is Game 7, Round 2. So do you feel as though their destiny is meaningfully changed to where you can see them not only making a conference finals, but like making the finals with this team? If this is your top team in terms of what their ceiling was before to what their ceiling is now.
I still think they need one more move to make. I think that they'll be able to diagnose those problems in season. I think it's pretty obvious what the issues are going to be with this team. Mainly point of attack defense and rebounding, I think, is going to be the two things that kind of stand out to me.
I think rebounding even more than point of attack too.
Yeah,
like,
and
the rebounding is really the thing I think that screams to me. Like,
well, and also more importantly, I do think that if the only thing that I think I would change that, but this is not Kelly Oubre slander. I love how great he was for us. But if I had known we were going to get Caleb Martin on the contract that we got him on, and we could go back in time and offer a bigger contract to Nicholas Batum instead of Kelly Oubre as that fifth starter. The reason why is I think that people that didn't watch the Sixers don't realize how important Batum was to the Sixers, not just as a floor spacer, connector, that kind of stuff, but also he was still probably our best perimeter defender on the team when you consider his team defense, his ability to hang with guards. He was really the only guy that was able to hang with Jalen Brunson at all in that entire series. And even at his age is still very nimble, just an incredibly smart player and someone that I think the Sixers are really going to miss. And that their job now is to find a facsimile to that kind of player, maybe hopefully preferably someone younger, but Nicholas Batum's just don't grow on trees. Like 17 teams made him offers in free agency for a reason. He's an extremely great glue guy on both ends of the court. 17 teams. I honestly still think, I think he's going to go down as one of the most underrated role players of all time, just because like he's like the archetype of like fits on any team. Especially as he got better as his career went on as a shooter, and was just absolutely lights out for the Sixers this past year. But yeah, like I said, I think right now I feel pretty good about the team. I like the fact that they added a ton of athleticism. I like the fact that they added, more spacing, a willing shooter in Paul George. We'll see if Jared McCain and Eric Gordon, where they land in the rotation, but just to have more floor spacers at the guard spots, now that they're a little bit more dependent on the forward and big spots for creation potential. Also, Andre Drummond is the best backup that Joel's had and fits very well with the team. But I think that this team is very good. I think in the regular season, if they got decent health, they could legitimately win 55 to 60 games. But I still think that there is one more piece, and that's why they gave KJ Martin an $8 million contract to trade at the deadline, and they'll reassess from there and see who they can potentially acquire at this deadline. They still have 4 first-round picks to trade, and like Daryl Morey, if he thinks a team can win a championship, will push in the chips. So I'm excited to see what they do there.
Cool. Sam, your thoughts?
So I want to go back to something Trill brought up. Because I think looking at it, the outside of, I think the closest the Sixers have come, even with the James Harden team, I think the closest the Sixers came to a championship was the 2019 team with Jimmy Butler. You have the Kawhi shot. There's a lot there, but like you're kind of you have a team that you have a second star that makes way more sense with Joel Embiid, and you're taking the alpha dog of Jimmy Butler off that team, and you are inserting Paul George into that role. And Embiid has taken a beating as for his playoff performances, the injuries, all of that stuff. I just want to focus on the different, having Jimmy Butler versus Paul George. So because Jimmy Butler is a guy, he's a screen star. There's lots of videos of him doing advertisements. He's working on movies. He's doing some of these things. And then you have Paul George, who is a podcaster. So I just want to point out something
the most important profession alive, by the way.
And his studio's probably in the garage. Where's Paul? Is he in the garage? Yeah.
So my 7th grade teacher used to say something about the oldest profession, and he was making a dirty joke. But the oldest profession is podcasting. You would talk around the fire. Yeah. It's the oldest, most noble profession. So, and I think that is interesting, because you think about Jimmy Butler, he's like a screen star, he's like a movie star.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think about women look at Austin Butler and they can kind of tell oh, that's not really for me. What I need is a podcaster, someone who's cerebral, thoughtful, will kind of give me the space to talk, is a good listener, can interview, doesn't need all the attention all of the time.
Hangs out with Lil Dicky.
Yeah, takes financial advice from Lil Dicky.
Yeah.
Just like me. That's just how I trade my stocks. Yeah. I'm really far in the hole right now. I actually can't move out of my house. But, I've done a good job with that. So I just think that it makes a big fit. And I'm huge on the Sixers right now because, quite frankly, I believe in the social value of podcasters and kind of what they're able to bring to the table. And I think that everyone should learn from this and give a podcaster a chance. Lisa, if you're listening to this podcast, please give the podcaster I tried my best. I was doing, sorry. I'll give her a call after this. I don't. Get
It's
into this right
okay.
now.
It's okay. It's a good point, and Paul's
Yeah.
romantic history speaks for itself in that sense. So here's what I think. Trill, I think that's obviously I'm sure you've gone that deep and deeper on the Sixers roster on your own feed. I will say that in terms of them changing their ultimate destiny, a lot of that is still going to come down to Embiid.
Yep.
Paul, who is a self-reflective guy, has said openly, like, I am the guy next to the guy. Like, I don't consider myself really an alpha anymore or anything. He's like, when I joined with Kawhi, I had to really be upfront and honest with myself about that. So it's not going to be him making shot after shot down the stretch in like a game 7, maybe in one series, but not for 3 or 4 consecutive. And with Joel, I do wonder, and it's it's an honest question. It could go either way. I wonder, with all the injuries that he's had and the sort of inconsistent play that I think is mostly due to being as banged up as he has been. I think that's basically what it is. Like, there's always this talk, that Zach Lowe has said it a million times, that like the monster postseason is coming. It's coming. He's going to be healthy one of these years. You just go in enough years with Joel, he'll be as fresh as he can be, and it's going to happen. Let's say he is healthy for a playoff run, which is honestly probably less than a 50% chance that he's like feeling fresh as a daisy going into the playoffs. But if the Sixers do get that, I wonder if there's just been so much not bad habits, but just sort of like rickety experiences to where Embiid all of a sudden becomes more deferential because he's used to needing to be more deferential because of physical limitations in the playoffs.
Sure.
It might be that exists and he overcomes it all in the span of one playoff run or something like that. But Maxey is such a monster and like so comfortable being a high volume playoff kind of star that I do think that one of Paul's biggest contributions as sort of the real veteran on the team will be helping, doing whatever he can to sort of sort that hierarchy out and make sure that both guys are as comfortable as they can be. I know that's like a Simmonsy, it's all about chemistry.
I was literally
Yeah.
gonna say, when you were saying the thing about it's, he's been through battles and he might just get some PTSD house. I don't know, like, he's seen some shit in these playoffs and
Right.
he's never really the guy you can count on. No, but in all seriousness, I do think there is some legitimacy to that. I also think that I've said this to Sam many times on the podcast, where I always I'll be honest I get shit from Sixers fans all the time because I am more, I wouldn't say mean towards Embiid, just critical of Embiid than any other Sixers person that follows the team when I feel like he underperforms in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really think he underperformed at all in these I actually think the team other than Maxey, was pretty much non-existent and let him down for a good chunk of that series. Now, he couldn't jump, which is part of this issue, and the Knicks were able to exploit some of the limitations that he had in terms of Isaiah Hartenstein with that floater, and Jalen Brunson in general. That matchup was not great for Joel defensively. It's usually his defense that is great in the playoffs, and his offense is kind of lagging behind. These playoffs, I thought it was his best passing that I've ever seen from him. I felt like the offense was always great when he was on the court. And I felt like outside of really that game where Maxey saved them at Madison Square Garden, game 5, where Joel was just completely gassed in the second half, he really didn't have one of those meltdown Joel Embiid style playoff games. And even then, Maxey gets them to overtime, and Joel comes up with a few huge plays in overtime to keep the series alive. He scored 40 points in the last game of the series, was very effective as a offensive hub in this series. And when he was off the court, we really just had no one. And the hope with getting Paul George is between Maxey, Paul George. We'll see if Kyle Lowry's body is still, intact by the time we get to the playoffs. Just having like multiple creators who you can run an offense through, I think will be huge for the non-Joel minutes as much as those minutes need to be maximized with those guys when they're all on the court together. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm really excited for next season and just to see kind of how it all comes together. I do think that people need to stop kind of putting a ceiling on how good Maxey can be. I think the playoffs prove that. And Joel himself has said, like, I think Tyrese Maxey is good enough to be a legitimate MVP candidate in the NBA. So I really do think that, like, it really comes down to Joel's health and how good does Maxey get. Those are the two things. And if those two things happen, then they can be as good as anyone in the NBA. If those two things don't happen, then they're probably going to have a similar destiny.
Maxey has not yet made All NBA yet, right? Just because the Sixers have not had a high seed when he's been really great. You know,
he would. I think he would have made it if Joel had stayed healthy this year.
I do too. Yeah,
because his impact stats and all of his numbers were like incredible as the second option to Joel. He was more like borderline all-star level without Joel, I would say. But he's talked about how important it was for him in terms of seeing different coverages and learning how to read a defense and all that stuff when Joel was out. So the hope is that long term that ends up being beneficial for him. I think that he's almost a lock to make at least third team All NBA next year, I would imagine.
I think it's, I mean, look, if Joel stays healthy, Maxey's going to make an All NBA team. Yeah. I think that's how I view it. I think his numbers are so good and he is so talented that will essentially take care of itself if they're a top 3 seed in the East or whatever. But speaking of the top 3 seeds in the East, I will stay positive. I like the positivity that we're all exhibiting. We are all free to take a negative team whenever we want, but I am going to go to the Knicks. And the reason I'm selecting them, we've talked about their pick value that they gave up, you know, giving up picks that are in 2029 and 2031 when you've, as I have said it to my friends, the Hoopers in our chat, spending 9 years in Tibet, you know, that's going to be very dangerous, a 2029, 2031 unprotected pick. So putting that to the side, this team that they have right now, where I would imagine the starting lineup is Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Randall, Mitch Robinson. And you have Hart and DiVincenzo off the bench with Miles McBride. And I guess they just signed Campaign. They got to get it back up big. That's fair. I think that they are probably, on paper, one of the 3 most talented teams in the NBA. Now, that is because I value their depth very, very much. I think the modern NBA, the NBA as it exists today, is very much like a game of attrition. Injuries are so inevitable to everyone. And, you know, Celtics were no exception because of Porzingis' injury. But the reason the Celtics won the title and were the most dominant team in the regular season is because they were so well composed and well constructed and so deep that they could absorb something like that and keep it going. I don't think the Knicks are as well composed as the Celtics are because those 5 I listed may not even be the best 5-man lineup that the Knicks can run out. You know, you take Randall out of the starting lineup, you put on more shooting with DiVincenzo or something. There's ways to do it, but this is a unbelievably deep team. And the Knicks that beat the Sixers did so, I'm trying to remember. Randall was hurt. Was Anunoby was healthy that entire series, but Mitch Robinson was hurt. Is that correct?
Mitchell Robinson got hurt in like the 3rd or 4th game, yeah.
And look, I know they lost. They lost. I always mess this up. Hartenstein? Which one is it?
Yeah.
Hartenstein.
Yeah.
Hartenstein.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, Isaiah Wolfenstein, 64.
Yeah.
Yes.
They lost Ike H. And so he departs. That's a meaningful loss. I'm not trying to dance around that. I just think that because they, even with Tibbs running everybody into the ground, there's a real task for him to figure all of that out and to be a bit more judicious on how he meets out all of those minutes. But I think that they are sort of, I don't know, an injury to Brunson can unravel everything, obviously, but when they're that deep along the wing, I mean, DiVincenzo, Hart, Bridges, Anunoby, Randall, we can all have quibbles with should Randall come off the bench? Should he work more as a backup five? How is that going to play out? They just have so many solutions in case something is a little clunky that as long, and it's a big, asterisk, but as long as Tibbs figures out that clunkiness, it's almost like the lineup is Tibbs proof that you'd have to be such a hard-headed dope to not find an elite five-man unit with what the Knicks have provided, that I think that they can, I mean, they don't coast because they are psychotic, but they can psycho their way, in my opinion, to 55 wins in the same way that I feel like the Sixers could get into that realm as well. And I think that they are good enough to where if they ran into the Celtics in a playoff series, again, we got to see what injuries do to these teams by the time that happens. They can feel good about how they match up on paper. And I'll kick it to Sam, since you're the Celtics guy. Like, out of the Sixers and the Knicks, who are you more worried about as a potential opponent
Sixers.
Down the road?
Sixers, 100%.
You are.
This is I'll have our first big disagreement of the podcast. I've kind of staked out my claim as a Knicks skeptic going into the year.
Okay, let's hear
it. First of all, I'm of the opinion that the Hartenstein was really valuable for them, and I think Mitchell Robinson's injury concerns are they're pretty substantial. He hasn't had necessarily a Rob Williams type career, but he's probably had like the next step up, like where he hasn't really played a full season of NBA basketball, and he does miss a pretty extended chunk of time. And I think if he goes down, you're stuck playing Randall at center, which I think is good, but I know Knicks fans say, well, once Randall comes back, we're going to be like awesome. I think part of the Knicks postseason success kind of was that Randall went down, and it kind of snapped their whole team into place because you kind of got to unlock Jalen Brunson, who's a stud, and obviously an All-NBA guy last year, is also a small guard. They're very reliant on him as well. I just think that there was a lot of things that went very right for them. I know that they had a ton of injuries and kind of fell apart, and they had that loss to the Pacers and everything like that. I am very concerned about their size. I think everything you said, Chuck, is correct. I think that they are well constructed to absorb injuries during an 82-game season. I think the Knicks could absolutely win 56, 57 wins. I'm not really worried about the regular season. Even if Mitchell Robinson goes down in the regular season, they're fine. I'm concerned about what I feel like the Mikal Bridges move was more of a floor raising move instead of a ceiling raising move, and I feel like they needed a ceiling raising move. Like, I think Mikal Bridges really shores up their Trill and I talk about this all the time. The no shitters lineup, like you don't have any bad guys. Like, you just have a rotation of guys who are like real NBA players who are good at everything. Nobody's bad at like any one thing. There's no place to
they all have,
at.
Except for Brunson, they're all two-way players, basically.
They're all two-way players,
and Brunson is the offensive engine, so you can live with it.
You live with it, and you kind of have everyone else compensate for that, and they're going to be really well able to compensate for that. Like, now, instead of two wing stud, like, you have Hart, they're going to rebound the shit out of the ball with or without Mitchell Robinson, and that maybe helps them survive more against these big options. But I think when you get to the playoffs, you need to have someone who's like a stud scorer, and I think their reliance on just Jalen Brunson, I think, is going to kind of come back to bite them. We saw Jalen Brunson really ran out of steam, and maybe part of that was injuries, but it happened the year before last too. Like
I was literally saying leading up to the playoffs, my God, please give us the Knicks in the second round. Because I was like, first round, they're going to be just healthy enough, and the Sixers are not going to be healthy enough because Joel's going through this right now, and Melton was dead, and Covington was dead, and all these guys that we needed in that series were dead. And I was like, please just give us one round to let the Knicks run themselves into the ground. And that's exactly what happened. It happens every year with Tibbs teams. Like, we can talk like it's just some random occurrence. And look, some of it is random freak stuff. Like, Randall's injury was random.
Mitchell Robinson's injury was probably pretty random, to be honest.
No, it was not. It was a stress fracture. It was the
never
opposite
mind.
of random.
Never mind.
Which is why Knicks fans drove me insane when they were talking about Joel Embiid. A doctor on Twitter was literally like, it was a stress fracture.
That's right. Because didn't he like went out of the game, but then it turned out it was a stress fracture because it looked like it was an injury that Joel gave him, but then he was.
It was literally
the game.
3 games later that this happened.
Okay, yeah,
that's why I was going so insane when everyone was losing their mind over it. But anyway, yes, Tibbs will run all these guys into the ground. Don't worry. Mikal Bridges, 82 games a season. Let's test that. Let's push it to the max. OG Anunoby, do you like your hamstrings? Like, it's just a reality at this point. Like, he does it with all of his guys, and there's no turning the switch off. Like, we've had a decade of data here to tell us that Tibbs will play these guys the most minutes. Josh Hart played like twice as many minutes as like any Sixers starter from January through July or June, and he was in impeccable
he held
shape.
up, except his stomach kind of fell out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and once again, some of it will be random. You know what's random? When you play 500 minutes, you're more in a row. You're more likely to get injured because you're playing all the time. Like, that's my thing. It's like, while they are random, minute load going up, workload going up, the injury variance goes up as well. That's why, like, I think the Knicks are incredibly talented. I think Mikal Bridges is probably about as Tibbs proof as you can get for a guy. And I think
he's an Iron Man.
I've even made the argument on the podcast. I said to Sam, I think they can win the East, and I think they can win the final or make the finals. I don't think they can beat a West team if a West team is good enough and healthy enough if they get to the finals, just because I think that the West is going to produce some form of juggernaut that comes out of that conference, most likely, unless we have a Maverick style run like we just saw. But yeah, long story short, I think the Knicks are very good. I just think that they went way further than I would have in terms of pick equity.
Y'all were the ones who I believe made the point that because there's this extra level of vibe around all of these Villanova guys, that the Knicks have like vibed themselves into a corner where down the line they might not have the flexibility to make sort of the necessary moves, the cold-blooded moves that's like trading Hart or DiVincenzo in a deal for someone who might be. I thought that was a very good point when I heard it on your podcast. Look, I think the last 2 champions, the Nuggets and the Celtics, have been so what seems to be like immaculately constructed that like each team seemed like it fit so well and that their style of play was so harmonious that there is a temptation to look at any team that is a little misshapen, which this Knicks team is. I think starting with Randall, he is the one where should he even be starting on this team or should you replace him with more shooting? Look at a team that's any misshapen and just say like, well, it's unlikely for them to actually figure all this out on the fly. And Tibbs may not be the guy to figure something like this out on the fly. It may fall to someone a bit more creative. However, having said that, there is a lot to be said for just having so much talent on the books where you're right. I think there's a very strong likelihood. I wouldn't know if it's any more or less likely than an Embiid injury, but there's a very strong likelihood that injuries just ultimately derail this. But I'd rather have, and I'm not comparing it to the Sixers, I'm saying in general, I would rather have the ceiling be the finals. And I would disagree. I think if they get to the finals, again, the fact that injuries affect everyone, I wouldn't rule the Knicks out in a finals if they got there.
Sure.
But I'll say that I would rather have the ability to get there with all of this talent than than what the Knicks were last year, which was like a really good team, but you knew that Tibbs was playing Hart, DiVincenzo, Brunson so many minutes, partially because he had to, because the alternative was Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, and that really wasn't going to work.
Bojan got hurt too.
As far as Bridges goes, though, because I think that is another big swing factor in how you view the ceiling of this team. I think it's valid because when you saw him as a younger player in Phoenix, when they were relying on him heavily for a contender, it became clear that he's not this like on-ball defensive beast stopper that maybe his reputation suggested prior to really getting into deep water in the playoffs, that he's really more of a help guy at the nail, and he has all this length that can be really helpful in rotations, but like a really good player cooks him. The thing is that, again, I'm tired of saying assuming health. OG really can be that guy. He is that legit all defensive level stopper wing. And so you don't need Mikal to sort of stretch beyond his limits. And Mikal has been so ridiculously efficient since his second year in the league, with the exception of last year in whatever Brooklyn was, that I tend to
And
trust
he also was, until honestly, he was still really efficient until like January, and then was like, this team's going nowhere. And I honestly don't blame him for kind of coasting for the rest of the year.
So like, that's my thing, is like, I would rather trust the record that I think Mikal is more the fringe all-star type that is, you know, an accommodator in a, not in the same way that Paul George can be, because Paul's more talented, but in the way that, you know, he fits like a glove anywhere. And I think that he can help. I don't know about locking the team into place, because they still got to figure out Randall, and I'd rather them start OG at the 4, frankly. But I just think there are solutions here. There's so much here, and there's such an understanding from the top down that, like, look, we're in now. This is about this team contending, that hopefully that means that Tibbs doesn't fuck around as much as he has in the past with, you know, or maybe like not fucking around enough, where like we really got to figure this out right now. There's no more like playing all these guys all these minutes to build habits. Like, we've got to go. And if they do,
Tyler Kolak, get ready to learn backup point guard, buddy.
Well, they still have Deuce. Deuce would still be my preference there.
Sure.
And they signed Campaign, but like even that,
oh,
they
I forgot.
all
I
these
forgot they
different
signed.
options. You know,
Why did they draft? Well, why did they draft Kolak if they were just going to sign Campaign anyway? Anyway,
second round pick. Who cares? You know,
24 years old.
They have their rotation. They have like 11 guys they need to play. Like it doesn't, you know. So here's my thing, because I agree with everything you just said, Chuck, and I think that like Mikal Bridges to me is like a super version of like the Derek White player, like a truly huge like luxury, like guy who can kind of scale up a little bit, almost like in his offensive role, but is still has that same ability to kind of put stuff on the table without taking things off. I just think my problem
super
with
Danny Green. That's always been.
super Danny Green. Yeah, pick your like fourth starter guy who's like awesome, that like all the nerds love. Like, you know, and he's more of a third starter. You know, like so that you know. That works. I think everything you said about the talent, I think for me it comes back down to like they kind of have the same problem the Celtics have, but in a more extreme version, where it's like, can you win the title with the 5th to 8th best player in the NBA as your best player? Like the rest of your team has to be really fucking good in that case. Every other champion recently, you had Jokic, runaway MVP, Steph Curry, you had going back, Giannis, LeBron James. Like these are all MVP caliber guys, and like Jason Tatum is a really good player, and I feel pretty strongly like a better player than Jalen Brunson might have. You can probably talk me into Jalen Brunson had a better season than Jason Tatum last year. Jason Tatum's a better player than Jalen Brunson. Yeah. Like, and I just that's my concern, is that like when I say like they doubled down on raising their floor, when I don't think they really needed to raise their floor. I think their floor was fine. They needed to go out and get a ceiling raising guy. Like Donovan Mitchell was the name on everyone's like lips, and the fit is not great with Jalen Brunson. And you know, maybe that guy wasn't out there this offseason. Like I don't know who they should have gone and got in that case, but I don't know. I would just have rather they try to find a you know, again, I'm just saying a guard, a Kyrie Irving style guy like they got for Luka, or something like that. Something to kind of raise their variance and give them a little bit more oomph, because right now I just don't think that in the playoffs you've got to have that guy or be built perfectly like the Celtics were. Like Jason Tatum was throwing up duds all through the playoffs, and it didn't matter because he took a step back and facilitated, passed, rebounded, did that other stuff. And I don't think Jalen Brunson doesn't have that same versatility when he's getting shut down. So that's my concern with the Knicks. Just to go back to that.
Yeah, I think very fair. I can do a little response, but Trill, do you have anything?
I mean, I just think they're going to trade Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson for Karl Anthony Towns eventually. I think that's.
I'll
You
feel
think
a
that
lot better
happened?
about their team. I feel a
Yeah.
lot better about their team.
I think that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Well, that
I
would
think
require that. I mean, that would really. I guess I would
it's.
say
I don't
I
know
was
how
gonna
how the trade works, but I think that will be a trade that they try to make in the future. I know they
but
still
not
like Cat.
necessarily
I know
during this calendar year, like
maybe not. Maybe
next
not. I
summer.
don't know. Might be this offseason, might be this deadline, might be a year from now. I know that Minnesota is going to not go deep into, they're not going to go into the second apron. And Karl Anthony Towns starts making $60 million a year next year. Jalen Brunson just took a discount. Mikal Bridges is willing to take a discount. Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, because of the health and availability issues, probably more so is not viewed as part of their core. And Julius Randle's kind of the odd man out here. Like it's the Nova guys. I just think that that's a move that eventually happens. And I think that is very interesting if you add Cat as the 5 as a spacer, and then you have the functionally OG playing like a defensive center position with all of that shooting and creation, and that would be an even more interesting team to me. I honestly think I could talk myself into that team winning the finals.
I almost think they might try to renegotiate with Cat. They might say, look at all the Instagram followers you can get. That's actually worth $30 million.
Clout points.
Yeah, the Instagram accounts.
Yeah, I was told Isaiah Hartenstein will rue the day he turned down took $30 million to leave the New York Knicks.
Sorry, man, you're losing 100,000 Instagram followers. Do you have any idea what that's like?
Yeah, if they swing that deal for Cat, then I will like them more as well. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. This is probably the team I'm most excited to watch this year, because if it goes wrong for a non-injury reason, I want to see what that is. I know that it is.
I can't imagine in the regular season. Like,
Yeah,
I think I think they're going to be the 1 seed personally, because I think that the Celtics are just going to, they'll be missing Porzingis. They're going to care a little bit less about the regular season. And I think that the Sixers have kind of sent the message that this is going to be Joel plays 50 games next year.
Also, are there any Knicks in the Olympics? Because I know that obviously the Celtics and Sixers have guys on that roster.
I don't think they have any Olympians.
Yeah,
No, they had a bunch of guys in the pool, but I don't think they have anyone.
Yeah. Okay.
Might be a rest advantage too.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked out a lot about the old Atlantic Division, East Coast elitism, as we are.
I didn't
here on
realize.
Chuck
Jeez.
Yeah. Wow.
Sam, who do you got next?
Let me, I really do kind of want to go negative.
Do it.
But it's not as interesting. Let's do one more. Let's get our nerd shit out of the way here at the top. Let's gush about the Thunder. I'm not a Thunder guy. I've said Sam Presti needs to go to prison. He needs to go to a penal colony. He needs to be arrested for crimes. I have sent all branches, the NSA, CIA, FBI. We have all converged on Sam Presti for 4 to 5 years ago when, or I guess it was probably 3 years ago when I was sure that he was faking Shea's injury to like get the Chet pick. And I was like, this is absurd. Like they're ruining their chances. And I told Trill on our podcast, the Utah Jazz are going to be a contender well before the Oklahoma City Thunder are. Oopsie poopsie. My update on that one. So I didn't really. I thought the Thunder, my critique of the Thunder all year, I thought, like a lot of people, there was a lot of talk about this in the NBA media. I thought they were getting too cute about their assets. They still somehow didn't really trade a lot of draft picks this offseason. And I just thought that Sam Presti was doing a Ponzi scheme for job security. That it was just like, oh, well, we're young. We don't have to be in any rush. Like, oh, look at how like good. And the fact is, it's not like the Spurs where it's like, oh, yeah, you aren't in any rush. You have Wemby under contract and you suck. That they were good. They were the #1 seed in the West last year. And I think that their guy for the help might not have been out there, but only making the Gordon Hayward move at the trade deadline was really bad. And I think they had a very clear need at the big spot to make themselves a little bit more versatile, rebounding wise, to kind of give they're give themselves a chance to play jumbo with Chet at the 4 sometimes, and kind of have a little bit bruising of a center. They addressed that with Hartenstein. I thought it was a great pickup for them, and they re-signed some of their guys to scam contracts. I want to see what sort of real estate filings are going on. I want to see what sort of under the table deals are going on, but they kind of crushed this offseason. They drafted Topic, my guy, who I think is the number.
That's right. You are a Topic guy.
I was a Topic guy, and they got him at 12, which was really good piece of work by them. And so they're set up for the future. They're set up for like going forward. They have an MVP candidate in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They, with some of we'll probably talk about the Nuggets a little bit later, but some of the teams in the West that are favorites kind of taking a step back. They're my clear favorites out of the West next year. I'm probably going to be picking them out of the West next year, and they've got a pretty good shot to win the title. If you can get out of the West, I think they've got a good shot to win the title, especially with the Celtics being built around Porzingis, who was, injured again this year. So I think they crushed the offseason. They still have all of their draft equity. They turned their biggest on-floor liability in Josh Giddey into a supercharged version of Lou Dort. They can now turn around and trade Lou Dort if they so want to, because they have Alex Caruso available as kind of a facsimile of that same thing. They can keep Lou Dort and kind of have this just punishing backcourt confidence. They just have a lot of flexibility. They have a lot of spacing. They're a team that's pretty well built for the playoffs, and they have all of this pick draft equity where they can pounce on any opportunities that come up. They did a really good job, and unfortunately, as the drill tweet says, sometimes you do have to hand it to the terrorist group ISIL, and I will be handing it to Sam Presti in this case. He did a good job, so sadly.
Trill, you agree that they are the favorites in the West?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, I've been higher on the Thunder throughout this whole process. I've kind of liked pretty much how they've handled the whole thing. I even was fine with them. My whole argument at the deadline was like, what team did give up value to get, like, clearly the market just kind of sucked at this deadline outside of the Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby trades that were made a month in advance of the deadline.
I mean, PJ Washington would be the one you would compare to, since he obviously, had that variant series and the Mavericks won it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I'm not as high on PJ Washington in general, but yes, that certainly, the Mavs being aggressive at the deadline helped them make a run to the finals, undeniably. But OKC, the position that they were in, I was like, look, they're young enough. They can diagnose their problems when they get to the playoffs. They can see what they have. And when they originally made the Giddey for Caruso trade, I was just like, brilliant piece of work, because Caruso's just a much better NBA player than Josh Giddey is right now. And is, even if I didn't feel like was what they didn't address their biggest need, which coming out of the playoffs, I felt like their biggest need was one of adding a big or adding extra playmaking to the mix that could stay on the court. Unlike Josh Giddey, when, Shai was the only one that was really able to create his own offense for himself and for others in that Mavericks series. It did get a little bit tough with J-Dub and Chet in that series, but they're very young. And then once they added Hartenstein for nothing, just a little bit of an overpay for him, I thought that was brilliant, just because now you have a guy that can give you a different look for any given matchup. If they weren't able to add that second, that extra playmaking / creator instantly, that would really boost it. Someone that can set really great screens, that can run dribble handoffs, that can be a little bit of an offensive hub when the the creators do not have it, is a great substitute for that. And they're going to have an elite perimeter defense. Great. But like Sam said, they're just perfectly built for the modern NBA. They're perfectly built for the playoffs. And Shai beat any sort of question marks that people had about his game in the playoffs. I felt like that was really the biggest thing to me, is like, I know Shai is that guy, but also we still needed to see it, because since he's become that guy, they haven't been to the playoffs. They haven't seen the defenses that they're going to see. And him proving that last year was the most important thing to me. And now these other young guys can slowly come along. They just keep taking these creator bets too. I like the fact that they took Topic, AJ Mitchell, and Dylan Jones in the draft, and they said, "Fuck it, we're just going to keep going for as many creators as we can possibly have at any given time, and we're going to try to make ourselves unguardable offensively in the playoffs." And I think eventually that strategy is just going to pay off, and they're really creating like their own version of, kind of what the Celtics just did in terms of like
Yeah.
having two-way guys that could space the floor, that could do a little bit of everything, and it's virtually impossible to slow down those kind of teams when they really are rolling.
Yeah, I won't go so far as to say they are my favorites in the West, just because I need to go back and probably do a little bit more research into Minnesota and how I really feel about them and everything. Denver, I'm not as pumped about. We might get to Denver, we might not, but I didn't like them just letting Contavious walk the way that they did. But as far as the Thunder go, Caruso's addition to that team sort of it's sort of a different version of what the Knicks have, where between him and Wallace and Dort, there
I
is
didn't
so
even
much.
say Wallace. I didn't even bring up Wallace. Like
Yeah.
that's the thing. They're so absurdly deep. Like it's crazy. Yeah.
And deep in the ways that really matter, where they can make sure that Shea is never overtaxed on defense. It's one thing to try to build your team to have your best player avoid being targeted. Like that's sort of how the Knicks are built, where they want to help out Brunson as much as they can, even though Brunson is always sort of a target on the floor. Shea isn't even really a target. Like if an offense goes out of its way to target Shea, they're probably getting out of their own rhythm, because I don't buy the all defense cases for Shea that people make, because I don't really agree with that. But the fact that they can make sure that he is always comfortable on the floor, putting him in the best position to cook on offense in the ways that he wants. I mean, it's just another, like I said, if we're talking about immaculate construction, they are in the top tier of sort of immaculately constructed teams. I think that their ceiling for this season might be a title. Like maybe they are good enough. The only real question I have with the Caruso and Hartenstein additions is that neither one of them really excel as creative offensive players or even high usage offensive players. And so you're asking a lot of Jalen Williams, who I love. I've been on record multiple times saying that I prefer Jalen Williams to Paolo. You're expecting an awful lot of him.
You also called that pre-draft too. You can take a victory lap on that. You came on my podcast 2 years ago and talked about him being like, I think the comparison at the time you said was like a Desmond Bane type, and he's even better than that. Still, great call.
Well, thanks, man. I still didn't rank him as high enough as I should, but whatever.
I do that
like
every
him.
year. I'm like, this guy, he could be Donovan Mitchell. That's why he's 19th on my board.
But
it's
asking a lot of very young players to excel offensively in the very biggest moments. I know that Shea is like now 25 or 26. He's old enough to where
he's that guy.
There's not like he'll have solutions for just about anything.
Yep.
Jalen, I think, just turned 23, will be like just have turned 24 into playoff time. And if you guys really want to get into draft sicko waters, I know the get ready to learn whatever buddy meme is very popular now. It's just like, get ready to learn every player's birthday that enters the NBA. It will be a gilded cage from which you can never escape. But Jalen will be 24 entering next year's playoffs. And Chet will be, I think, 22. So it's just a question of whether you are really ready to win the title at that time. But if not this year, then next year or the year after. So I don't have really much to add other than I think that offensive development has to take place before they're really ready to go. But all the pieces are in place. I don't think there's any other seismic move they necessarily need to make or anything like that.
Sam brought this up on our podcast when we're talking about the Cavs, and we gave the Cavs, even though the Cavs made literally no transactions other than just extending Donovan Mitchell and using their draft picks, he was like, let's just give them a B, because this was the only thing that mattered, was keeping Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland. They did it. Congratulations. That's kind of how I feel about the Thunder's last 2 years, where like 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been super comfortable. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I don't know if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would have been able to stay for the long haul. Now I do, because they have this young core around him. They have all these picks. They're adding in veteran role players that fit very well with what they want to do. And now he's going to sign that Supermax extension a year from now. And you just take your window from this year and next year to this year, next year, the following year, the following year. Like it's this offseason and the last year or two for the Thunder, what they were able to do in the draft, free agency and trade wise, is just really opening up a window that they desperately needed.
Yeah. I guess there is a question about how much tax they're eventually going to be willing to pay and how all that sorts itself out. It does feel
Thunder fans have yelled at me. They've paid the tax before.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just telling you. I didn't realize that they actually were in the top 10 in terms of teams that have paid the tax in the past. I always assumed that they were more like the Memphis, New Orleans kind of markets that are just like, we're never going to pay the tax. But I think that ownership has enough trust in Presti and what they're doing. And also I think a big part of that is just how many picks they have is like they can keep this model sustainable and cheap for pretty long.
Also, if you draft 3 MVPs, yes, you're gonna have a high payroll. Like that's the insane
but they
thing
didn't
to me.
They didn't extend
They
Harden.
didn't extend Harden, but that's what I'm saying. Like they traded their guy. Like, yes, you paid a lot in tax, but like every team pays the tax that has a top 2 player in the NBA under contract.
I don't think the Pelicans would. I think that's the difference is what I'm trying to get at here.
I think they would have to.
I don't think I literally think that they will never go into the tax. They never have. And I think that that's why no one wants to play for the Pelicans.
But here's the thing is they would sell the team at that point. Like if they had a top 2 player in that, I know Zion Williamson's very good, but like, let's say Luka Doncic played for the Pelicans.
Let's say Trey Murphy played for him.
Yeah, there we go.
Even better than Luka.
Let's go, my guy. But like, let's say it's like Luka or someone like that, like played for the Pelicans. Gail Benson is selling that team like for $3 billion.
The good news is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander might be that guy. So,
well, that's what I'm saying. And they might get ready to go back to Seattle, buddy. Once they buy it, they buy the team.
Don't need to expand.
Yeah, no, it would just be a bummer if, because I understand what you're saying about keeping the team sustainable through the draft, but it's one thing to keep a team solid through the draft. It's another to keep them a title contender by reintegrating, or not even reintegrating, integrating new pieces every single year. The Nuggets think that they can do that, but they are finding out that is a bit more difficult than it seems in theory. The Warriors have already found that out.
The Bucks have said, we don't have to hit on a draft pick for 7 years. We're good.
Yeah. 2 timelines. I mean, that sort of model has been shown time and again to be very flawed. Yep. I know that if anyone can do it, Presti can, but Presti traded James Harden, had a chance to take Giannis, and he went 3 picks later, which you and I have covered. So there's just, that stuff can go awry when you're just like, oh, we'll take care of it in the draft and we'll just keep contending for a title. If you have the chance to contend, you got to be aggressive. And I do applaud them for going out and getting Caruso in that deal and being aggressive. And by saying just like, whatever, this is sticker shock money for Hartenstein, but we don't care because it's time. And I do think it is their time. I just think that their window might be a teensy bit narrower than it appears. But
would they push in the chips? Speaking of, look, a year ago, if you had told me that Giannis or Embiid could ask out, I probably would have been like, yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about that today. If either of those guys ask out, will probably Giannis more so than Embiid, just because I know Giannis has missed a lot of time in the last 2 playoffs, but he just doesn't have the health concerns that Joel has. Mm-hmm. Would Presti push in the chips? You think that he's just going to keep with what they're doing right now? Because
it would cost him like Chet or Jalen Williams. He's not going to do that.
That's what I'm saying.
Because he'd be competing with Houston, who has all these players. And I think they kind of want to trade Şengün. And that's what Houston in a minute would be like, what do you want?
I didn't even think of Houston. That's a great point. Very, very good point. That if, he would kind of be... They have all these picks, all those players. Yep.
It's also not 1-to-1, but I also think that the Suns trade for Kevin Durant has also kind of scared people a little. Obviously, it's a very different situation. Giannis is nowhere near as old as Kevin Durant. The Thunder have so many more assets than the Suns did at that point in time, but you're still talking about trading for a guy who's older than some of your other guys in your timeline, like
30, 31.
30, 31.
And look,
guy who
Giannis is probably
shoot.
going to be, I was going to say, Giannis is probably going to be really good until he's like 34, 35, but guys that rely on athleticism usually aren't Giannis's size.
He's the most bagless, like, Hall of Famer we've ever had.
Yeah. Well, Rudy Gobert exists, but yes.
Do we think Rudy's a Hall of Famer?
Yeah, he won 3 Defensive Player of the Year.
I don't know. There's a lot of bigs in the Hall of Fame who might be a little more bagless than Giannis.
Giannis is the wing, so I guess it's like a wing big hybrid.
How about this? Most bagless.
He's his own
MVP.
thing.
Most bagless MVP.
I don't know, Dave Cowan's not bag. I don't know.
Yeah,
he was cooking. Dave Cowens was
all right
on the low block. He was a low block.
All right, Shaq, Giannis, Dave Cowens.
Shaq had moves. Like,
Shaq did have moves. Yes.
Giannis is just the halfback draw, the halfback dive every time.
Yeah, I would say
if it works, don't. I
would say I think OKC would be much more into Giannis than Embiid, because Embiid would force Shea to change the way he plays more than Giannis would, and also OKC are so culture obsessed that they would want someone that they feel like they really could re-sign and fits with all of their vibe. And I think like psycho Giannis more fits with their vibe than Embiid would. So if they were to do it for someone, I think it would be Giannis. But I ultimately don't think that they could bring themselves to do it. They also like to play 5 out with their starters. I mean, Hartenstein is really the exception there, where they've finally taken a step and be like, we want to spend assets on someone who doesn't shoot threes. But Giannis, it's worth it because it's Giannis, but that would cause a bit of clunkiness where they normally don't want to have any. So I think they would find reasons not to do it, is my point. But yeah. Trill, you got another team?
It's not the most exciting. I know we talked. Well, let's just talk about the Bucks real quick, because
in which direction, positively or negatively?
So I don't know. That's the thing, is that I'm kind of like, because everything that they've done that set them up for this offseason is negative. Not drafting well for years. Kind of, look, I like the Damian Lillard trade at the time. I thought that they had to shake things up. I thought that the Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Giannis thing had kind of reached its logical conclusion. And, maybe some of that was just injuries, but also that's part of everything. I didn't know that they were going to turn around and then trade him to the Celtics, and, that made the Celtics pretty much unbeatable in the playoffs last year. But, look, those things happen. I feel like I said, the Bucks putting themselves in this financial hell. The Bucks not hitting on any draft picks literally since Dante DiVincenzo in 2018, who they didn't even give a second contract. And Malcolm Brogdon, if you want to go back further, and they didn't give him a second contract either.
Grayson Allen, they traded him. Yeah.
They didn't even draft Grayson Allen, did they?
Oh, they didn't? I thought they did.
The
Jazz did.
Oh, yeah.
He was traded, and then he played for Memphis. Remember, Grayson Allen played for Memphis?
Yeah.
And then he was traded to the Bucks. So the way that the Bucks have acquired talent is very interesting to me, because like they've kind of done more of the second draft stuff, right? Like Grayson's an example of that. Bobby Portis is an example of that, where they get guys kind of closer to their primes that maybe weren't given the right opportunity. Even Malik Beasley more recently last year kind of plugged into a context that makes a little bit more sense for him, has a career year, gets a little bit more of a bag from the Pistons this offseason. They kind of did it again. It's very funny, because I remember a little over a year ago, I came onto your podcast, Chuck, and we were discussing, would they trade Bobby Portis for Gary Trent Jr.? And now they have Gary Trent Jr. on a veterans minimum deal.
Mm-hmm.
And while this model that they've built right now is obviously not sustainable, they upgraded Patrick Beverley to DeLon Wright. They I think Jay Crowder to Taurean Prince is a bit more of a lateral move, but Jay Crowder's also washed. And then Malik Beasley to Gary Trent Jr. is probably just like a slight bump up, but if you add him as the fifth guy in some of their lineups, I think we discussed we liked that fit as like adding some defensive playmaking, also potentially, just being more of a creator when they need a shot in a pinch. Just some things that they've kind of lacked throughout the years. And I know this team's a little bit more offensively tilted because they have Dame instead of Drew. And I think when we talked about it, they had Drew on the team. But I like the three guys that they picked up, despite not really liking their draft at all, not really understanding their draft at all. Although, did you see the AJ Johnson thing about his contract?
No, what is his contract?
He did the thing where he took less money for that deal so that they could basically have lesser tax problems.
Oh,
and
the
like
Josh Eustace.
Yes, Josh Eustace. That was it. I was like, I knew that there was that's why they selected him at the end of the first, because they were willing to do that. So he took less money on his first year so that they could save some money on his rookie scale deal. So
I think Dadia did that as well for New York, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think both of those guys took cuts in order to get drafted in the first round. But long story short, didn't love their draft, as I haven't for like 7 years. Don't really.
Smith.
Tyler Smith's all right. It's all right.
A fine second round pick. The majority of second round picks don't work out though. Like, I mean, no, I think that
we're talking about a top 15 talent in this draft,
okay.
according to my draft board.
Fair.
So
it's not a bad bet, and I've actually have liked it more.
He's fine.
More I've thought about it, because I think they view him as some sort of like some prospect on a Portis to Lopez spectrum. Maybe more tilted toward Portis, but there's real talent there. And size and shooting, some defense.
I said after the draft, if you flipped AJ Johnson in his positions, I would have liked their draft more. Like, I would have been like, okay, they took Tyler Smith in the first round, then they took a flyer on AJ Johnson in the second. Most second round picks don't become anything anyway. Who cares? But I like the fact that they have 3 real rotation players that they added, and they're all not 37 years old. Like the Sixers just did with their veterans minimum guys, and what the Bucks have done the last few years with their veterans minimum guys. So I think, considering what they had, they did about as good as you possibly can. I think of those 3 guys, though, the only one I trust to stay on the court in the playoffs is DeLon Wright.
And at sort of a reduced minutes low. Like you trust his 14 to 17 minutes a game.
Yeah, I think even upwards of like 20, just because I think they're so deprived for anyone that can guard on the perimeter at all. And I actually think DeLon Wright, he's been up and down in the playoffs, but if you look at his career throughout the playoffs, he's been a pretty, like, he hasn't been on teams that have made runs. So that's the difference. It's usually only first or second round, but he's at least had some performances in the playoffs that leads me to believe that he can be a guy that can hang. Gary Trent Jr., I don't know. I like the fit a lot. I know he's reunited with Dame now. They played together in Portland. And I like him as like maybe like a more athletic, kind of grows into a role with the Bucks as a 5th guy in a lot of lineups, but he also has to change his game a little bit. Like, he doesn't pass the ball. He's not a great finisher around the rim. And the defense has always been there in moments and not sustained itself. So yeah, I like what they did, but I just don't really know. Everything they did before this kind of set them up for the situation that they're in now, which is where they really just have no avenues to improve outside of veterans minimum deals.
Yeah, I think it's like a good case, because I think they are better than they were last year. And of course, Dame presumably is going to work out this summer. Poor Doc, dealing with such a deck stacked against him. It really seems like every time Doc coaches a team, there's just something insurmountable in his way. I really hope that he can choose his path to where it lines up for him a little bit better. Unfortunately, me personally with Doc, I am a 0%er, which means that I think that basically any team Doc coaches has a 0% chance to win the NBA Finals. And if he proves me wrong, then that's great. I I would love to see it. I would love to see.
I can't believe I'm about to defend Doc Rivers, but I came on your podcast before and I was like, Doc was not the reason that the Sixers lost that series.
I know.
And I honestly, if they had won that series, they'd probably go to the NBA Finals. Like maybe the Heat beat them because Spo's cooking up Devil Magic and Caleb Martin has the series that he has. But do just want to. I'm not ever one to defend Doc Rivers, but they had a shot that year.
I think that they did have, like, I don't know. I guess it depends on how you define success. Could the Bucks, like in the same way the Sixers could have made the finals that year, could the Bucks make the finals with this team?
Yeah.
No,
I think so.
No.
I don't know. I think they have Giannis, and like I think that Giannis has become a little bit. He's a little bit overrated as a playoff performer in general. I think because people just remember 2021, and he even struggled at times during that. But he also has not really been healthy the last 2 years. And if we just get a healthy Giannis with like. Look, I know Dame looks washed half the time. I know Chris Middleton has looked washed half the time. They also both had monster performances when Giannis went down in the playoffs, and I'm just interested to see what that team looks like when we get to the playoffs next year.
Yeah. No, well, they'll have the added spacing of Giannis when Giannis is on the floor, and I'm sure those numbers will stay right. It was a bad trade. It's a bad fit. I'm sorry, Dame is over. I feel like Gretchen Wieners from Mean Girls. Stop trying to make Dame happen. It's not going to happen. You took a divorced man and put him in Wisconsin. That's on you. That was never going to work.
Not a good culture fit.
Yeah, that's not a good culture fit. Like it just, I don't know. I think so. I'm gonna have to go to bed here in a second, so I'll leave you with my thoughts on the Bucks because I'm inclined to agree with Trill because I kind of feel the same way about their offseason how I felt about Dallas last offseason. I thought Dallas was in a lot of trouble. I spent a lot of last offseason making jokes about Luka Doncic in 2025 being on the Knicks because I just thought they were in such a bad spot. Kyrie hadn't re-signed. They had all these draft picks out the window from all these other trades, and they turned around and they absolutely nailed their offseason. Like they had the Lively pick. They did that weird Rashawn Holmes trade. They found ways to get some of these guys. They brought in Derrick Jones Jr. Like they found all these ways to kind of make themselves like a little bit better with basically nothing. And that's the thing is the Bucks have nothing. They just started paying off all their picks they owe for the Drew Holiday trade. Like they just started that like last year, the year before last, I think, was the first pick out the door for that. So that's pretty scary. And not to mention all the other stuff they have going. They have like basically no second round draft picks. And yet they keep, if you remove all of what, as Trill said, what brought them to this point.
Yeah.
And you just judge them on what they got done this offseason with what they've had, you kind of can't really ask for them to do any better. Like they got
3 of like the 6 best veterans minimum guys.
Yeah, I do think I think they probably will be better this year. But the problem is that I think the East is going to be better this year. The Sixers finally have a coherent team after like literally 8 years or whatever it's been. The Knicks, as we just talked about, are a very good team. The Celtics are defending champs. The Pacers.
To be clear, I would say they're the 4th. I would go those 3 teams and then Milwaukee if I'm talking about coming out of the East.
But if you put a gun to my head and said, Sam, if the Bucks don't finish higher in the standings than the Orlando Magic or the Pacers, you're going to die. I'm very scared. Those teams, like the Pacers,
you don't have another option to like to get security for yourself. This is just a hostage situation. That's a tough beat. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, look, my girlfriend is very mean when she. She's a huge Pacers and Magic fan. I don't know what that came from. She just loves Pascal. I don't know. But I just like there are young teams on the come up. Like I think the Magic got substantially better. They probably played a little bit above their head last year, but they make a lot more sense from a team perspective this year. And I think Franz had kind of a bad year, and I'm kind of expecting him to bounce back a little bit. Like I think that the Pacers, they're going to have a full off season. They kind of built their team on the fly out of nowhere last year with Pascal Siakam. And then Halliburton was like kind of hurt down the stretch, and Nembhard kind of had a coming out play after the. I don't know. I don't think they're a lock to have home court, especially with these older guys. Any of them
I
time
agree.
like, and I realize I'm kind of stepping on my toes about like, well, I don't like the Knicks because Jalen Brunson's not a top guy, and they do have one of the top guys in Giannis, but I'm a little bit concerned about their long term viability because of that. But I think they did about as well as they could have with their offseason, given where they were, what they were dealt to work with. So it's a kind of a strange offseason. What do we give them, Trill? We gave them a B. Is that what we gave them, or?
I think we gave him a C, but I would bump it up to a B or an A, considering the fact that they got Gary Trent Jr. after that. And I know it sounds weird. It sounds weird to do that for Gary Trent Jr., who like is just a fine player, but I've just liked the fit, and I think considering all of the things we talked about, like they're a better team. I understand that I'd probably be a little bit more worried about them in the playoffs. I think they're going to be a really good regular season team.
I think they have the potential to be. I just can't do it with Doc, but I'm not going to repeat that point over and over again.
Doc's not bad in the regular season. We won a decent amount of games when he was here.
Right. When the MVP plays for his team, yes.
Sure.
And if Giannis wins the MVP,
yeah, there you go. I mean, they have Giannis and Dame,
great.
and like
yeah.
Giannis and Dame is not a far off facsimile from Joel and Wash Harden.
Yeah. Well, right. Maxey on that team as well. But
I do just want to be. The league is so much better than it was 2 or 3 years ago. That like there aren't gimmies like there used to be. There's literally 2 teams tanking, like we talked about. Like most teams want to win.
And that's why Doc's sort of like, oh, I'm a player's code practice. Who cares? Like, I don't know that is really going to hold up.
Yeah.
Whatever. We'll see.
They need to put up Doc's picture at every like country club in the Milwaukee area. Like if they want to make this work. The politician. Isn't the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee?
Yeah.
This year? Yeah.
It is.
I'm just saying, Doc, look, he's not drawing up plays tonight.
Yeah.
He's Lincoln Project. He's out there. He's down on the pavement.
Great chaser for Amber Rose, Doc Rivers. Sam, anything else you wanna pop off with before you take your leave?
No, well, I just thank you for having us. This was a lot of fun. I'm sorry I have a job. That's a really hopefully I don't have one very much. Don't clip this and send this to my employer. I do kind of need a job because I just put down a security deposit on an apartment. But
let's go.
We're very excited. So I just think I think we're in for a really good season, and I'm really interested to see kind of what happens, because I think the league continues to be even more talented than it was last year, and I think we're due for expansion. I guess is what I'm gonna say, because there's a lot of guys kind of washing out of the league that I don't think should wash out of the league, and I think that we definitely have the talent to sustain 1 or 2 more teams. LeBron James, please stop ruining your son's life and instead bring us a Vegas team, sir.
That'll go straight to LeBron. To LeBron.
We talk a lot, so I'll give him a call. All right. Later.
Thank you, Sam. You're the man.
Peace, Sam.
Yeah. So Trill, do you have anything else on the Bucks? You want me to name another one?
That's kind of it. You can name another one. By the way, I do just want to point out Alex Sarr went 0 for 15 in Summer League tonight. You know what's really funny?
Yeah.
I had him number 1 on my board for I watched the G League Ignite game that he dominated, and I was like, wow, this guy.
He looked great.
He looked incredible in that game. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the pitch for him, right? That game. And then I watched more and more, and the more I was like, he's 7 foot and he can't finish. And he can kind of create, but not really. And he's not going to do traditional big things. He did some of those things with his Australian league team, but he's not going to be setting 100 screens and rolling to the basket and whatever. So I dropped him to 5, and I was like, I still believe in the defensive upside, and I think, but the offense is just not really there. And I don't want to overreact to Summer League, but 0 for 15 is kind of startling when you see it. And these were the reasons that I was a little bit lower than I was earlier in the process.
Not to necessarily be forgotten, but Klingon, I mean, they went 0 for 15, only lost by 2. Klingon went 3.
Bub went off, by the way.
Played well, but he was 6 for 19. No one really.
Oh, I didn't see. I didn't see. I just saw the final stat line. So
yeah, his final stat line did look good, and we love Bub. Both
yes.
you and I love Bub very much.
Yes.
Klingon went 3 for 10 in that game, and Klingon's shooting lines have like not been good at all. And I
watched him last night. The offense is still far away, but I also want to give him a little bit of lenience just because the summer league guards are like, you hope that Portland, like Scoot, can take a step next year is my thing. And like if Scoot takes that step, multiple steps, I should say, then it should be good for Klingon. But yeah, no, the offense is still very far away. And it's funny because he was viewed as like the safest pick in the draft. So
he's also like very consciously shooting threes, which is dragging things down a bit. But even inside, I mean, his touch was not good at UConn, in my opinion. I had him 6th and Sar 7th is where I finished with both of them, just because I didn't see the offensive ceiling really with either. But
yeah, I had him 6 too. Yeah, because I was just like, the defense is legit, very legit. His instincts are incredible. He moves very well for a guy with his tools. But yeah, I landed on like he's like super Jakob Poeltl is his ceiling for me.
He really is an interesting inverse with Ayton, who's like all shooting touch and like it's none of the other. Yeah, whatever. But I should not be so mean to Ayton. I think Ayton's actually kind of getting a bit of a bad rap. I think he's a fine player. I think if the Pelicans wanted to do an Ingram for Ayton,
I said this. I said the same thing. Yeah. I was like, they should do it. I think both teams should do it.
I think it makes some sense. I also think that if they really can't find a center to get for Ingram, then like a Barnes. I know they can't trade for Barnes because Barnes was just traded, but whenever that is lifted, a Barnes, Keldon Johnson, something for Ingram also makes a little bit of sense, because I think the Wemby fit with him is good enough to where the Spurs don't have to worry about like, oh, do we have the wrong guy next to Wembanyama or anything. I think that could be pretty good, but
yeah, Brandon Ingram's getting squeezed. He's getting squeezed by this CBA.
As for a team for me to pick, I could go negative and say the Nuggets, because I really think that we mentioned it. I'm not going to harp on it too much, but going this 2 timeline route when you are consistently picking in the late 20s is just very hard. I don't want to say that they now have like no chance to make the finals or win the title. I have too much respect for Jokic to really say that. But Kentavious is extremely good, really good. So good that I lean Sam's way in thinking that the Magic could very well be a top 4 seed in the East this year. I think his fit with every team is so seamless. And I think though the Bucks did well to get Gary Trent, that they were not in a position to get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. The gap between Trent and Caldwell-Pope is like a very significant gap, even though they might superficially seem to be similar players. And Christian Brown will play and will start for them. Even though they're saying there's a competition, whatever. It'll be Christian Brown. The defense will be there, but if you are now in the position where even in your starting lineup, you are providing an option for other teams to try to cheat off of, and Brown will do enough, like he'll cut and relocate off of Jokic to sort of paper over the fact that he's just sort of an ass shooter, not a great one. He'll do his best, and the Nugs might have enough to get through the playoffs and get back to the top of the mountain. I just think they are increasing the degree of difficulty on themselves in an uncomfortable way, in a way where I think they are now relying on Jokic to cover up for the flaws in their team's construction, when they should be constructing the team to make things easier on him instead of harder. And I just don't generally like that pattern,
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. The Sixers did that for years, wasted a lot of Joel Embiid's prime, doing that and making flawed rosters and constantly cycling in and out. Look, I think that this is very different than their offseason last year, where they lost Bruce Brown, but also it's like they couldn't pay Bruce Brown. It's similar to the Knicks with Isaiah Hartenstein, where they literally could not pay him because of the contract that he was on. They were only able to offer him. They could have offered Kentavious Caldwell-Pope whatever to stay, but they didn't want to go into the deeper into the tax. They didn't want to whatever talk about all that. And I've kind of said this. My pitch with this was like, I don't think this was a strategic move. The two timeline things, was it a strategic move that Calvin Booth just like thought of and was like, oh, let's do this? It was, he knows they have cheap ownership and that he's going to need to hit on these Peyton Watson, Christian Brown, Jalen Pickett, Julian Strother, Hunter Tyson, whatever type picks. Because if he doesn't, then they find themselves, and Daron Holmes unfortunately tore his Achilles in Summer League.
Really sad. Yeah.
That's so shitty because it's like that was the one thing that I'm like, well, maybe if Daron is just like ready to play right away and he's like a good fit for what they need, that he can cover up some of the issues that they have, even though that they lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and he's done for the year. And like, I don't know. I do think that we're starting to get to the point where it's like, I give the Bucks a lot of shit for kind of how they've handled the last few years and how they never hit on the draft picks and whatever. But at least they're always aggressive and shuffling through guys on like taxpayer mid-levels, on a second draft guys like I talked about before with Bobby Portis, and Pat Connaughton was a second draft guy. Like they always are trying to acquire players that are young enough that have some upside. The Nuggets just every year are like, let's give our taxpayer mid-level to Reggie Jackson and then have to salary dump him a year later.
Well, and Russell Westbrook is not a taxpayer, but like that's their big acquisition now.
They'll get him for a veteran's minimum, and okay, like that's great. Jokic and him are friends. Maybe that will be fine in the regular season. We know how that goes in the playoffs. And the other thing is like Dario Saric, like really, like.
Yeah, I forgot that's where he went.
They used their taxpayer mid-level. They gave him a 2-year deal. They did the same exact deal that they did with Reggie Jackson. Like, look, I'm not saying that Dario Saric isn't a good basketball player. I actually think he is. It's just he's gonna play the 5 because he's just not nimble enough to play the 4 anymore.
Of course.
He hasn't been for 4 years. And so you're paying the taxpayer mid-level for a guy who's never going to play with your best player. And while the Sixers just did that with Andre Drummond, their approach is going to be different. And they've said time and time again that they want to keep Joel healthy for the playoffs. Jokic is always healthy is the thing. It's like he doesn't miss time. And like there were guys that were available at this thing that I would have liked to see them take a little bit more of a swing on. I'm not the biggest Gary Trent guy. I would have offered Gary Trent taxpayer mid-level. At least there's upside there if it has potential to work out. I'm not even like Lonnie Walker's still a free agent. Like there are guys that you could take that are youngish or at least like in their prime that you could offer that to, that could play with your best player and maybe potentially give you another element of something to bring to the table with your best player on the court. Now you just signed a guy who at maximum his value is 15 minutes a game and almost certainly won't be able to play in the playoffs.
But will play by reputation.
Exactly. So I'm like, the Zeke Naji contract extension was awful last offseason. Who were you bidding against? Why didn't you just wait to extend him until this offseason? And you wouldn't have if you hadn't. And by the way, there was a Nuggets person who calculated that if they didn't give that extension to Zeke Naji last offseason, they would have access to a full MLE this offseason. So they could have maybe signed 2 different players. If Kentavious Caldwell-Pope walked and potentially had a way to replace him that way, maybe they could have even done the 1-year prove-it deal to a DeAnthony Melton. Like, I don't know. I just feel like they tied their hands behind their back for no reason, and they just constantly keep making all these small mistakes that add up to a big one.
Yeah, and I think I agree that a lot of it comes from ownership. I'm not saying that Calvin Booth has like a bottomless well of resources to work with. I just think that, to your point, even within those constraints, he still, I don't think, has done any, like, I don't know what small move that they have done that has like been a home run that's been so good. And I like Christian Braun. I think he was a good draft pick at 21, I think is when they took him. And I like Peyton Watson, but I think with Peyton Watson, like, I mean, the first step to really being a playoff viable player in the NBA is being someone that the other team can't ignore when they defend you, because that's the quickest way to just bake in a disadvantage for your team, unfortunately. And he, it remains to be seen. Like I think he was a worthy draft pick, but I think it was naive of Calvin Booth to essentially say last preseason, like, oh, he's gonna be better than like Bruce Brown immediately. Like, we've got Peyton Watson. And it's like, man, not for where you want to go right now this year in contending. And that's just sort of what has stuck in my head, is that Booth seems to think that all these guys, they just happens, and it doesn't. Development, especially for someone as young as Watson, who was very young entering the league and who averaged
barely
whatever,
played at 3 points a game in
yeah,
college. He
4 points a
played.
game at UCLA or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like, it is going to take time. And that's like, time is not something they necessarily have, especially if this Murray extension actually happens and it's 50 million a year, whatever it's going to be. Like, you've got to be ready to go. And so and they don't seem to be orchestrating themselves to where they are ready to go with the best version of their team. I think it's possible the best version of their team has already existed. So that's where I'm out.
Did for 2 years. Like, that
Yeah.
was,
yeah.
That was the perfect moment for.
But Brown is legit. Like, I do want to leave. Like, I think his replacement for Pope is better than Zeke Naji at backup big, or DeAndre Jordan at backup big,
No, definitely.
or Russell Westbrook at backup point. Like, it's just that enough of it adds up. That's all.
I think that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is simultaneously overrated and underrated.
I think
I think that he makes a lot of lineups work. I think he makes a lot of sense on a lot of really good teams. And I also think that losing him is not the end of the world for a team that has Nikola Jokic.
No, that's why I'm saying it's not the end of the world, but I do think it decreases their odds in sort of a bummer way. Yeah. If you are wanting to win a title, that's all.
The one thing I will say, and Nuggets fans have pointed this out, and it's not Cope, because they all hated their offseason. They all have said, I willingly admit I hated the offseason. But in that series against Minnesota, the thing that they really struggled with was Minnesota's athleticism. Mm-hmm. And because KCP was had some lingering injury or whatever, Christian Braun actually did a better job with some of their perimeter options, like Anthony Edwards, on defense, at least. So if the offense can come along, if he can become a 45% corner shooter, that would be ideal. But I don't trust them to be able to replace Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's production 100%.
No. But I think, like I said, I think that they could still win it all. I just think they changed their destiny a bit by making it harder on themselves. That's all.
Is there anyone out there that they could realistically get? Like, signing Dennis Smith Jr. doesn't matter. I'm trying to think of who. Is there anyone they could acquire?
They don't really. I have no idea with this Apron stuff, man, about what is a realistic trade target and what is not. I gotta really get on my Bobby Marks shit and figure it out and try to see what makes sense.
I kind of stole this idea from someone who came on our podcast a few weeks ago. But we had Jack Quantrill from the Drop Step podcast on.
I love Jack, yeah.
And Jack was talking about, so he had this whole proposition of, it was basically a Michael Porter Jr. for Zach LaVine swap with Ayo Dosunmu thrown in, essentially, from Chicago's standpoint. And while I don't think they would do that trade, because obviously I think if they were open to trading Michael Porter Jr., they probably would have done it already and then shed some salary and signed Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. That maybe I think that they would try to do something like that. But I did like the Ayo fit a lot. If they were able to, if Chicago's just I know he's young enough and on a very tolerable contract, but if Chicago's just we're starting a rebuild and we're so far away, can you get Ayo for a first round pick on his contract? That would be very beneficial to the Nuggets. Like I would like that fit quite a bit if they were able to pull that off.
Yeah, I had this conversation with Chris Amundsen, who's a Bulls guy and a draft guy at Summer League. Not necessarily about Io, but we were talking about Bulls pieces and whether or not if they're really going into a rebuild. Like Kobe's on a really good contract, Io's on a really good contract. Like, would you look at trading the I just think that even for a team that's rebuilding, I just think you want to have something in-house that you
Sure.
develop that is yours. Like, I just think it's so hard to be so rudderless. And I just don't know. Is there a price at which you could get Io DeSumo? Yes, I'm sure that there is. But I don't, and even though I really like Io, I think for the Nuggets specifically, they probably would not make that trade because I think for all of Porter's faults, I would rather have him playing next to Jokic than Levine because I think
Sure.
Levine is more likely to get into ball stoppery tendencies. And also, you'd be giving up what is, I think, one of the Nuggets' real advantages, which is tremendous positional size in the front court. Like Porter, Gordon, Jokic is just enormous. And it's so hard for teams to deal with Porter's movement shooting and like Gordon punishing mismatches on the block, juggling both those responsibilities at the same time, both of them cutting off of Jokic. And I think that Porter, as like a rebounder and a weak side defender, has some utility. If you start to replace that and you start to get smaller, then the fact that Jokic still isn't this rim protector starts to, like, that negative trait starts to bubble up a little bit more frequently. So, like, I don't oppose the idea of trading Porter's money, but it needs to be for another sort of plus-sized kind of wing, and I don't know that player is really out there for them. That's sort of what I would say. Love Jack, though. Jack's great.
Yeah, and I really like. I don't think people realize how efficient Io DeSumo was this year.
Io's the man, dude.
50, 40, 80 splits, like on good volume from three, really good finisher, like super athletic. Passing was better this year, averaged 3 assists a game. I think that I'd be interested to see if someone like, because I'm a big proponent of like overpaying for good contracts. Like I'm willing to give up an extra like protected first round pick if I think I'm getting a guy on like a scam deal, is what I'm trying to say. Like
if you're ready to win on that scam deal,
sure,
then yeah.
Like if the Sixers were to get to this upcoming deadline, now Daryl Morey would never give up 2 first round picks for a player like Io, but like if it's one real first and one fake first, and then you're able to like get someone else in the trade or something that's like like Torrey Craig or whatever, just for like a final put you over the top style deal. I'm more open to those kind of things, but that's also why I'm not a GM. And why Daryl Morey is a GM. But people were giving me shit because I said I would give up 2 first round picks to get Tari Eason, because I had the same exact thought. I was like, I know Tari's very raw offensively still, and he's been our guy going back to the 2022 draft, but I'm like, oh, a big wing who can defend and rebound and basically fits exactly what the Sixers need, and is also on a contract that can fit very nicely on the books for the next 2 years.
Was a positive on-off player as a rookie. Rookie.
Look at his on-offs from the last 2 years. Like, they're incredible. He's a winner.
Philadelphia monster. I mean, let's go. It'd be tremendous.
The Rockets fans in this scenario, the Rockets were getting Donovan Mitchell, and they were still mad at me that I said I would give up 2 first round picks to get Tari Eason. So,
but, I mean, you and I have been talking about this literally for years about
that exact scenario.
Well, and about how teams don't trade, like the trade psychology in terms of going after someone who's on a rookie contract. Like guys on rookie contracts, it's so rare that they get dealt. But Giddey is a notable one because he's like a player of some value, and we can disagree on how valuable he is. But he is a player who played a big role on a 1 seed at age 21. Those guys don't typically get traded because the team wants to, I don't know. It's like we hold on to our asset, we extend our own guys, and usually there's no price that another team can meet in trading those guys. But I think that if you look at the teams that are pick flush and what makes sense for them to acquire, it's going to be cheaper deals unless like the right mega deal comes along, and that's going to be harder and harder to find. So could that happen more? I hope it does. I'm all for GMs looking for increasingly creative solutions to try to make their team better, but it will take sort of like, it's against Morey's MO. Like you said, he thinks he can find cheap role players. He would not expend capital that he thinks he can use to acquire a star, to acquire a role player. But
yep, that's always been his thing.
Yeah. Is there another team you want to hit on? I can do another one if you want.
Go for it.
Okay. So coming off of this is going to get since you and I are having a good time talking about stuff that we agree on, I am going to go a little draft sicko, a little bit. And I'm going to talk about the Sacramento Kings, because the Sacramento Kings drafted with the 13th overall pick a player you and I both really like, Trill, even though he's out with a shoulder injury, which is Devin Carter. They also acquired DeMar DeRozan for not much. Harrison Barnes and Chris Duarte and a couple second-round picks. And I guess their swap went out, and everyone talked about the swap at the time to the Spurs. Spurs obviously did a great job to get that swap. But I also think that the Kings, whatever, they have this team with Sabonis, and they want to try to be as good as they can be. And I respect that they want to be that. I'm not going to say that they really changed their destiny in terms of like making a conference finals, because I do think that Sabonis does kind of cap you. But I think they increase their odds a decent amount to be a top 6 team in the West, because DeMar is very durable. Traditionally, Sabonis is extremely durable, and durability matters a lot. And if other teams around them are dealing with injuries or dealing with roster clunkiness, I don't see a lot of clunk in this lineup. Even though DeMar's more used to having the ball, I think very highly of DeMar's game on offense. I think that he is the league's, frankly, most underrated passer and playmaker, because I think he is legitimately good. And I also think that he can play off the ball as needed. I just think that he is a pro. Not that he's going to be a crazy movement shooter, but I trust him to develop enough chemistry with Sabonis and with Fox to where the Kings always have good options, especially in close games, because Fox is a great clutch player. DeMar is a great clutch player that's borne out really every season that he was in Chicago. And though Carter's not going to debut for them until closer to the All-Star game, Devin's the man. I will give it to you to cook on him, because I know you ended very, very, very high on him. I ended on 5th on my board with Mr. Carter. But the way that I see him in a nutshell for this team is sort of an off-ball player to DeRozan and to Fox, who is going to, provide more defensive value at first than he does offensive. Might come off the bench because they just paid Monk, and that's fine. But he is the sort of low-waste player who can do a few very, very important things for modern NBA lineups. One is high-volume threes, which I believe firmly that he can do. Another is being able to guard multiple positions in the backcourt, including guarding guys out of his area and making defensive plays. That's what I call a switchblade guard, which I believe that he is. A third is supplemental rebounding to make sure that your team is not always getting killed on the glass. And a fourth is, in my opinion, I think he is a very good connective passer. I think that he can keep a very, very good offense going and raise that defensive floor, I guess, more than anything else, floor more than ceiling, enough to where your team is just good with him on the floor. He's somewhere on a scale. I called him a mix of Hart and DiVincenzo. I guess I was thinking about the Knicks at the time, but that's sort of what I see him as. And that is just a very valuable player to get. And I think with him and DeRozan, hopefully it happens this season, but that'd be quick even by Carter standards. I think that team can sort of lock itself in to a top 6 seed maybe for the next 2 or 3 years. And that is worth something. Not everyone can compete for a title, but it does matter that you are in the mix to that degree and giving yourself a chance at like a positive variance kind of run like the Mavs just had. And I think the Kings are a little bit closer to that than it may seem.
It's very funny because when they drafted Devin Carter, a lot of Kings fans had the Davion Mitchell PTSD, where they were like, "Why are we drafting?" And then we had to be like, "No, you don't get it." Like Devin Carter is that guy. I think both of us were a little bit lower on Davion Mitchell in the draft, if I remember correctly. But the reason why, first off, you introduced me to Devin Carter with back in like the fall when you were posting about kind of how underrated he was. But the more I watched him throughout the process, I think that he has like latent star upside in terms of,
I know you do.
In terms of, he has all of the qualities that you look for in a guy that kind of pops a little bit later. Like, he starts as a role player, doesn't really get a ton of opportunities. Actually, even when he did, he kind of was a bit messy on offense, turned the ball over a ton, wasn't quite as effective on that end. Second year, he goes to Providence and, grows a little bit as an offensive player. By his third year, he's the best player in the conference. And I have friends who are UConn fans who are texting me about the nightmares that he gave them for a team that won back-to-back national championships. He was going up against legit NBA caliber defenders and just he continued to improve his game all around. And we talked about like the pull-up shooting, the volume shooting, everything that you want to see from a guy that is taking steps as an offensive player every year. And the comp that I made was in terms of, I don't think he's going to reach the levels of offensive player that this player is. But the comp that I made was, it reminded me of similarly to when Donovan Mitchell was coming out. And everyone was like, well, he'll be like an Avery Bradley, Marcus Smart type. Like he'll be like in your grill, great point of attack defender, really good. Didn't really get a chance to show it off at Louisville. And my thing with Carter is like, he is a freak athlete. He crushed at the combine. He has an incredible wingspan. I do think that like being the son of an NBA player matters. And that was part of the reason why I was higher on Reed and both Devin Carter being the son of Anthony Carter, and Reed's
Jeff
dad
Shepherd.
never really had a great NBA career, but he was in the NBA at one point, and his mom also played in college as well, Stacey Reed. But those two, I do think that part of that matters just in terms of like their upbringing, living and breathing basketball their whole lives, constantly wanting to get better and being put in the perfect environment for them to get better. And I think that he has potential to be, at worst, a great glue guy, like you explained. I think that he's a fourth, fifth guy in lineups that just makes everything click and make sense. I think between him and Keon Ellis, they'll be kind of the fifth lineup guys in a lot of their makeup, because they're the rare team that's going to be getting the creation from the center position and the wing, with DeMar coming in here. And then they also have now just 4 creators in Monk, Fox, DeRozan, and Sabonis. I don't know how all the pieces fit, but I do think that this is going to make it so that like both Keegan and Devin Carter can kind of come along slowly in their development. And then if they really pop, whether it's, growing on the ball or growing as creators and becoming potentially better offensive guys later in their careers, then they're going to be in a great environment to do it, playing off of the guys that they're playing off of. And I think the fact that they're both so scalable in their games and can really fit on a number of winning teams and formulas, it's going to be great. I think it's cool that they pushed in. Like I still don't love the fit overall. Like I think some of the 3-point stuff is being a little bit overblown just because Fox and Monk are going to take a ton. Keegan's going to take a ton. Keon Ellis is going to take a ton. Devin Carter, when he's healthy, will eventually take a ton.
And they still have Herter. He's still somehow on their team.
Still around. Like we'll see where he can fit in. They'll probably have to play smaller a lot, I would imagine. But they just have enough guys to put up shots that I think that. And DeMar, while he doesn't really demand the attention that like Klay Thompson would on the perimeter as a 3-point shooter, the teams aren't going to Ben Simmons him. Like he's going to demand enough attention close enough to him.
DeMar?
Yeah.
No.
Like he's going to demand enough attention close enough to him that it doesn't ruin your spacing is what I'm trying to get at here, which is the thing that you always fear when you're adding in the Russell Westbrook a few years ago when he was on the Lakers. So I think that they're going to have a very potent offense, and maybe it's just going to be a different version of the formula they had 2 years ago where, hey, look, we're going to go up a ton of points, but we're also going to score a ton of points. And if our guys are more available than your guys, then we're going to rack up a ton of regular season wins.
Well, and I also, it really sucks for a million reasons that Devin's hurt right now, because I would love to see a team that had him as part of their rotation from the jump. But if you're dotting, because you mentioned Keon Ellis and but Keon, another switchblade guy, like if you have enough of these guys in your back pocket to mix in, like those are sort of like bench minute winner kind of guys. Just a nice little way to prop up, win on the margins, get those regular season wins. And I don't know if you know Colby Jones, who was their second-round pick last year. I've been impressed with him a lot at Summer League. The reason why he was not part of their rotation last year is really 3-point volume, because he wasn't getting, like, coming into the draft, that was his big thing that he needed to work on. And his 3-point volumes look pretty healthy in Summer League. And if he's another guy who's like Carter, not as explosive of an athlete, but a talented on-ball defender who can defend multiple positions and is strong and has touch inside the arc. If he is part of their rotation too and finds his way, like it's just a low-key, a really deep team. And I think as far as DeMar off the ball and the attention paid to him, like Sabonis is one of the best screeners in the game. DeMar and he can go to a 2-man game anytime. And like I said, I think DeMar is the league's most underrated passer, and I trust him in those moments a lot. Like, I think that I think this is the best Kings team since they acquired Sabonis. I'm very comfortable saying that. And so if that means that 50 wins is attainable, then that's a hell of an offseason. Like, it really is, given that they only really gave up one asset of note, which was this swap. So good for
the
them.
only thing is the West is just hell. Like they're going to be a very good regular season team. It's like you're just never going to be able to take a day off in that conference.
No,
this upcoming year.
But Sabonis doesn't, thankfully, and DeMar traditionally has not either. So yeah.
And one of the things that I think that is being a little bit undersold with the DeMar thing, even if I'm not like fully sold on the fit, is DeMar had this past season. He kind of picked it up towards the end of the season, but earlier in the season, it was like once every 3 days, DeMar, you would get him really cooking, and he would look great. And then as Levine goes out, and like Kobe had a great season, but like it was a lot of it was just DeMar bailing them out over and over and over and over and over again. And now he won't need to do that. Like he can pick his spots, he can pick his games. You can literally go game by game, week by week, and they have so much dynamic offensive talent that I can't see them not having the number one offense in the NBA this year. It's like they're going to at least be they'll probably be top 3 or 4 at worst, I would imagine. We'll see what they have to give up on the other end though.
Yeah, and I just like it might be that their defense is like 20th or whatever. I don't like if your offense is that good. If it's really that, like the Pacers defense was what, 27th or something this past season?
I called them Kings East coming into the year, and that's exactly what they were. They just copied the formula basically. They just did 5 in, 5 out.
They literally made the conference finals and were arguably the team most competitive with the Celtics in the playoffs.
And Halliburton missed 3 games of that series, 2 games of that series. Like,
like if your offense is really that good, then you have a lot to look forward to, and I think the Kings do.
Yep.
You have any other team you want to hit? I think you've technically done 2. You would have 1 left.
Do you want to go full first take? You know what? No, we shouldn't go full first take. I was going to say Lakers or Warriors, but I don't want to talk about them because I did like the Warriors offseason, but
I did too. I did too.
But
something tells me it's not done. I think Laurie will be a Warrior.
I think it's
if not on the one day they can trade for him, and or whatever before he gets extended. Or no, it's 1 day. If he does get extended, he can be traded like 1 day.
The deadline. Yeah.
I
think it's a mistake, but anyway.
But yeah.
If you got to keep Steph happy, you got to keep Steph happy sometimes. So let's talk about the Mavericks, because they were the team that kind of did the same thing that they did last year, where they made a bunch of moves despite not having really many assets, and kind of stretched it as far as you possibly can. And I'm still split on their offseason, because I wanted them to be aggressive. I felt like the one thing I like about Nico Harrison is that he's not afraid to be like, all right, that didn't work, let's move on.
Yeah, I like that about him too.
I think that's a smart way to go. Now, look, does it catch up to you eventually? Yes, but most teams don't have Luka Doncic in his prime. Like, that's kind of how I would operate too if I were running a team with Luka Doncic in his prime. And so if this is the way that everyone has been looking at it, right? Like, Tim Hardaway out, Klay Thompson in, Josh Green out, Quentin Grimes in.
Yep.
Derek Jones Jr. out, Najee Marshall in.
Right.
On its face, I like that. Like, it adds more spacing off the ball for Luka and Kyrie to operate. Klay's a better off-ball player. He's a better shooter. He's just a better player than Tim Hardaway Jr., who wasn't even in their rotation by the time they got the playoffs. Quentin Grimes had a disaster year last year. It's a buy low on a guy that I still think will be a good NBA player, like a kind of fits into a lot of lineups kind of guy that we talk about a lot. And then Najee Marshall, who is a different player than Derek Jones Jr. I really like Derek Jones Jr.'s fit on the Mavericks specifically because of the lob
verticality,
element that Najee's just not going to have. But Najee is more of a kind of do it all. He had a really good season this past year. He was honestly, if we got Caleb Martin, but him and Caleb Martin were my two favorite guys that we could have went after with that.
He's a badass too, dude. I mean, he is no
tough
joke.
Dude.
Mavs fans are gonna love him.
Tough dude. Like, very underrated as a connective passer and just a passer in general. For a guy his size with his defensive ability, I hope the shooting maintains itself the way that it did this past year. That's really the only question mark in his game for me. And even if it doesn't, I'm assuming Quentin Grimes bounces back and Klay Thompson nails a ton of threes for them. So he's at a minimum, I think, going to be an upgrade over Derek Jones Jr. in that department. And I like what they did, but I also am like, how does this all work now? Because they're saying Klay Thompson's going to play at the 3, and I just think about that defensive fit. And I think about Kyrie, Luka, Klay, PJ Washington, Lively. And offensively, it makes a lot of sense to me. And then you have Najee coming off the bench and Quentin Grimes coming off the bench as well. Maybe at certain points they'll change the lineup as well. But that's just a lot to put on Derek Lively has been my thing. Like, in the starting 5, I think PJ Washington's like a decent defender. I think that he got a little bit overrated in this whole run that they had recently because he was just not Grant Williams. And I think that where they can get defensively is really what's going to define this team for me, because I know offensively is actually what they struggled with when they got to the higher levels, which is probably why they were like, let's go get more shooting. Let's go get more spacing. Let's go get more things that will operate off of the ball without taking anything off the table. But I also think that defensively that was the reason they got to the finals. Like, their defense was like surprisingly good in the playoffs. And it was all based around kind of leaving guys open and, letting the kind of fake shooters shoot, and we'll clean up everything from there. We'll help off drives. We'll do all that. And then they ran into a team where you can't do that. And that is ultimately what sunk them. So I don't know. I'm split on their offseason, to be honest with you. Like, I like what they did, but I also think that I think the Klay Thompson thing has disaster potential.
I think he will need to come off the bench eventually if it's really going to work.
So do you start Najee at that 5th spot, or do you slide down Luka and you start Grimes in the backcourt?
No, I would start Najee. If it were like now, that said, if Najee's not hitting his threes, and then you have to pivot and whatever, you have the options to pivot. But Derek Jones, in addition to being a great vertical threat, is just really good at ground coverage. If you need him to X out and challenge a jump shooter to like run them off the line or make their three a little more difficult, he can do that. Clay can't do that. And so I would rather have the ground coverage that Najee affords you that allows you to help a little bit more aggressively and stunt on drives than you're going to be able to do with Clay. Like I would just rather have that element in there so you're not asking even more of Luka and Kyrie, because already they were probably straining themselves about as much as they can on defense with the team that they had this past season. I think the disaster potential, I wouldn't quite say, just because I think the team's structure, like their infrastructure, is so sound. Like the fact that Derek Lively will be in his second season and better than he was as a rookie, like he will, in terms of playing with Luka, will never be worse than he was last year, and he was very good last year. So just because of that, there will be some organic growth and better timing between the two of them and between he and Kyrie, to where I think their offense is just going to be really, really good.
Yeah.
And Grimes and Thompson, we mentioned how like rookie contract guys don't get traded as much. Grimes is the rare one who's been traded twice, but like is good and has been good. Like he's been
had like the
traded.
weirdest year last year.
Yeah.
It was
And
just like a weird, like, didn't really fit with the Knicks, and then like lost his confidence and couldn't hit shots, and then had a little bounce back, and then he got injured when he got to the Pistons, and he was terrible for the Pistons, but who isn't terrible in the Pistons? Like,
yeah, and I don't think the Knicks did anything. I don't think there was anything behind the scenes that was really bad, but like it was clear once they got Hart and signed DiVincenzo that minutes were going to be very hard for him to lock down
Yeah.
with that Nova crew in there. And so I can almost write that year off as just a wash. And the year before, he was like legit really good. Good ground coverage guy, high volume 3-point shooter.
he was good as a rookie.
I think that he can play clutch minutes for them, again,
Yeah.
in the right matchup, or if someone's banged up or whatever, and like not miss much of a beat. So I think the Mavs offense is very good. I still think they're very likely to be a top 6 team, if not higher than that. And how they figure out the Clay and Najee tandem and who to play what and when, that will matter. But I do think that eventually they will figure it out. So that's sort of how I feel about it.
I don't want to pivot back to Denver again here, but why didn't Denver just try the Reggie Jackson move for Quentin Grimes? like it took Tim Hardaway Jr.'s $17 million contract and 3 second-round picks to get Quentin Grimes. You couldn't have just flushed them with second-round picks and been like, take Reggie Jackson's $5 million, which almost exactly matches Quentin Grimes as the KCP replacement.
Yeah, why not? Indeed. I mean, who knows exactly why, but maybe, and I don't know the history between all these front offices, but like this is where relationships matter. Maybe Quentin was more interested in going to Dallas for whatever reason, or like Nico has a connect in that front office or to his agent or something. Like that Grimes Hardaway deal came together so quickly, like the rumors of it sort of.
We were laughing at it at first. I was like, there's no way that's what they're going to have to give up. Like, that's
right.
Like, I know Grimes' stock is low, but like, that seems like ridiculous to get off the Tim Hardaway contract and only give up seconds.
And that's another thing about Nico, is that I think that front office is pretty proactive. I think they're pretty intentional about the guys they target, and they don't wait for better and worse, they don't wait for the market to dictate to them. They go like, we think we can get this guy, we're going to go do it. And so it might just be that they acted more quickly than Denver did and identified Grimes as a guy more quickly than Denver did.
Also, I don't think noting Quentin Grimes from Texas.
There you go. Yeah.
Transferred from Kansas to Houston in school. Maybe he just wanted to be back closer to home. Like that. And I do think the teams will work with, like, if they're like, we're going to trade you anyway, they're willing to work with guys and get them to. It's not worth upsetting an agent or upsetting a player to, you know, maybe
Right.
extract a little bit more value in another in another way.
Right. I agree 100%. So, yeah, I forget, you brought the Mavs up, right? So is there anyone else you want to mention on them? Anything else?
That's kind of it. I mean, I think Lively is really going to dictate what they do next year, and I think you're right in that regard. Like, I think Lively's going to be really good. They'll take another step. I'm a little bit lower on them just because I think that this was a really look. Luka's still that guy, but this was a very lightning in a bottle run to me, and I think the West is going to be better, and I think that we'll see how they look, but I could see them taking a step back and being like in the play-in next year.
Possible. I think it's like, I don't know if you want to talk about Memphis. We could just geek out over Zach Edey and have
Well,
them be
that's
our
the
last
thing
team,
is like
but
let's do that because Memphis is a team that like I remember being like I'm not going to get tricked on Memphis again. But then they drafted Edey and I'm like let me get tricked with Memphis again because I was in on them last year but it just never got off the ground with the jaw suspension and him getting injured and their whole team being decimated. But like I really like Santi Aldama coming off their bench. Vince Williams stepped into a really nice role in that team. Scottie Pippen Jr. looked awesome in summer league and at
he's a
the
good
end of
player.
last year.
Yeah.
Just as like a backup point guard, like just like I think he'll give them solid minutes.
Brandon Clark back.
Brandon Clark back. Gigi Jackson. We'll see how he fits on a team. I'm a little bit lower on Gigi Jackson, I think, than consensus, but he's certainly talented. He can score the hell out of the ball. And he's still very, very young. But
Your
but
guy
yeah,
Laravia, I know you love yourself some Laravia.
some Jake Mins, turning up the Jake. No, I just think that they're like it sounds like they're gonna move on from Zaire Williams, and then they'll probably somehow get like a playable guy back for him, or maybe some future seconds or whatever. And yeah, man, like they didn't have a ton of picks, and like the thing about them is that they only have like they usually have like one first and then like 3 seconds, and then they just take flyers on the right guys in the second round, and then one of those guys usually works out. That's why I hated their 2022 draft because I was like, why are you giving up all your players and draft picks to take swings on guys when like you're the best second round drafted team in the NBA, arguably. Like just take the swings in the second round. Don't trade up to draft Laravia and Roddy. Like just wait and take guys in the second and you'll be fine. And
ironically, they got Vince Williams in that draft. And
there you go. Yeah, exactly. So like, and now this year, like who they get? Cam Spencer and Jalen Wells. One of those guys will be good, and like
at least one of them will be. Yeah.
And they'll have 12 playable NBA players, ton of size, ton of shooting. Edie's probably worst case scenario is super Steven Adams. And like I love the fit. I love what they're doing. And I know I have already proposed to Cam Johnson to the Warriors thing. I think they should trade Marcus Smart for Cam Johnson. And then see what they can. I just think the fit in terms of the spacing around that jaw Edie pick and roll will be very, very nice.
Yeah, I could get behind that trade. There is, at least in the short term, there is sort of an inherent issue with Ja getting picked off on picks and then Edie in drop kind of backpedaling, playing a two-man game. That is like a flaw in the short term is Edie gets his feet wet that they're going to have to figure out some way to handle that. And I do think that you would want a Marcus Smart type to take the point of attack on the toughest guys to try to make it a little harder to hunt Ja, at least in the regular season while you figure stuff out.
I don't know if he's that guy anymore. Like he's lost a little bit of a step on defense. Like I don't think that he's quite as like shifty and mobile as he used to be, and like he tends to guard up better than he guards down now too. So
could be, yeah. I mean, I could see all of that. They might be missing that kind of switchblade type because Spencer and Wells, as much as I like both of them, neither of them are that guy.
Yeah,
Conchar is not that guy, but they do just have lots of players. I'm interested to see what their team identity is, because typically it's defensive. I mean, that's what it has been in the past. And I just wonder, I wonder how well Jaren Jackson is as more of a full-time four who maybe closes games, but like plays a lot at the four off the five. With Adams, it was great. With Adams, it really, really worked. I think Edey has the potential to, I mean, obviously I have him number one on my board. I think he has the potential to grow into that. This season, they will have to figure that out, and they'll have to figure out, well, how many like post touches are we really going to get Edey? When we give him a post touch, where is everyone else standing on the floor, and how is he operating out of all of that? I expect Edey to figure all of that out, because I think he's going to be awesome. And I think even with these little questions, he's going to be a first team all rookie player and quite possibly the rookie of the year. But when you're talking about where they will land in the West, I think there's just questions. How many minutes can Brandon Clark handle? Do you want Brandon Clark playing with Edey? Now you have a non-shooter with him, potentially with Ja. All that stuff is kind of odd. Is Gigi going to get real minutes? I would kind of think no, he's not, but he played so well in silly season, in Mickey season, that you never know. Maybe he will get a look. Taylor Jenkins, really good coach. Like they will find themselves. Maybe they'll be like a big second half team making a surge once they actually settle a lot of this stuff out. So I would say if I'm looking at those top 6 seeds in the West, Oklahoma City for sure, Minnesota basically for sure, Denver essentially for sure. Too much respect for Jokic.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
they'll win a ton of regular season games.
Yeah. And so other 3 seeds, I don't know, is it like Memphis, Sacramento, and like Dallas? Are those the other 3? Like they could be. I don't know. I mean, that leaves out Phoenix, Golden State. It's tough, but
if Golden State doesn't make a move, I think they're in that play-in range. Even though I like their offseason, to be clear, I think they got better. I just think the Clay thing was done. I think they've added a few nice pieces. Also, Trey Jackson Davis and Podziemski will take a step. Kuminga might take a step, sure. The LA teams, I think they're kind of cooked. Like, it's really hard for me to see. Like, my big prediction for next year is James Harden's going to force a trade to the Lakers. Because Kawhi, we just don't know what's going on with him. And like, we know Harden gets impatient quick, and like he can easily make his way across town if he wants to. I'm out on the LA teams for next year. I think the Lakers didn't do anything, which might have even been the right move. But I thought they got really good health luck this past year, and I think it's just such a weird situation with them hiring JJ and the Bronny thing, and like Connect will be fine, but like I don't know. Like I'm not crazy about what they did this offseason. So I'm like, I think as the older teams kind of phase out, those teams you mentioned are probably the teams that I feel like in the regular season are going to be the best suited for the top 6.
I mean, there's also whatever the hell Houston's going to be. I mean, everyone's too young until they're not too young. And if you look at,
they just have so many good players. Like,
I know.
It's the Memphis thing. Both of these teams, Memphis is always prime for a consolidation trade because they just have too many guys. Like, in terms of like, they have too many guys that will want minutes and like contracts and shit. Like they just don't have enough to go around. Houston's gonna have that problem a year from now. Where like, all right, Tari Eason's playing 15 minutes a game. Like, Cam Whitmore can't even get into the rotation. Like, they're going to have a lot of questions and things that they need to solve as well. But this season, I still think that I'd have them in the play-in range, but they have a wide range of outcomes.
Yeah, since we're this deep into the podcast, again, on my group chat, a trade I floated, an eventual consolidation trade, because it's so hard because like a star needs to ask out and blah, 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 blah. But like if they wanted to make a Godfather offer, they wouldn't. They would rather just wait for Giannis or whatever and then deal with whoever. But if they wanted to be proactive and make an offer for someone next summer, probably they'll give this extremely deep team 1 season to look at it, and then it's time to pay Şengün or Jalen Green, and they're going to do something. Would be some trade where maybe I think Whitmore's likely involved, and then maybe one other really young piece. that's good to try to get in the conversation and see if they could get Cade Cunningham. I know Cade's a very caustic individual over at the Uniball world.
Well,
but
I'm a little bit kinder to Cade than Sam and the following is. I was a Cade skeptic from his rookie season.
I know.
But
yeah.
But we did an episode recently where we went through every transaction that Troy Weaver made, and I was like, how could anyone succeed in this context? Like I became a little bit more sympathetic to the Cade Cunningham truthers. But
well, and he's had flashes every season. That's the thing.
Yeah,
that like even if it's never been consistent because his context has been so terrible. Like he had a stretch at the end of his rookie year that was really good. And so like I don't know. But anyway, not that Detroit would necessarily do that, but you could make it hard for them to say no. You want to give them amen and reunite the Twins? You could make it difficult for them to say no. And if you did, then you can start to really put shooting at every position in Houston. And then you'd have something really interesting. But that
why wouldn't you consider it? Like the Pistons are so far away, and like my whole thing has been like I just don't think that they can ever be good with Cade's entering a max contract. We're 2 years away from Andrew Wiggins territory, to be completely honest. Where like it just gets to the point where it just doesn't work, and the team is just never good enough, and they need to make some way to. Now they fumbled that trade, obviously. Timberwolves. It led to something good for them, getting Anthony Edwards. But long story short, here we're reaching a territory of how long before there just needs to be a change of scenery. I know it sounds insane because he just signed a max contract, but like, look, I love Ron Holland. We both were big Ron guys. What that team is just never ever making sense.
Ron Assar and Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey.
Like what the fuck? No. Like you've been bigger on this than anyone. Like you can't just draft best player available every year anymore.
No.
And that is they did it again. and I like as much as I like the pick and I like Ron, like I do this every year with the Pistons where I come out of the draft being like, man, I really like what they did. And then their team is worse.
Yeah. Well, at least this time, I think they're more purposeful about their tanking because I think they really want one of these guys at the top of next year's draft. But that does mean
that's the good thing. But then again, the clock is starting to run out with the Cade thing. Well, either from their side or from his side, one of the two.
Well, I think what they will likely do, since it's a new regime and now it's a regime that hasn't drafted some of these other guys, but it is the regime that just extended Cade, is that Ivy and Duren, I mean, they're going to take quite the look at those two the first half of this season, and I think both of them could be on different teams by next year. I think
you're right there. Yeah, I think so.
But it's like, and that's why this is more of a pipe dream about getting Cade to Houston. Cade's also from Dallas, another Texas guy. Yeah. But it would be like when I started to think of who they could consolidate and who they could go after proactively, that's a name that came to mind. Now, reactively is how I think they prefer to do it. I think they want some disgruntled star to make an announcement next summer so that they don't have to pay both Şengün and Jalen Green. I think they would probably tell one or both of them go into restricted free agency and see what you can get.
Right, and we'll
because maybe they're counting on. I guess more teams have cap space next year though, so maybe it's going to be a tougher market for them to match in. But never know.
Just pay. Pay Şengün.
Pay both of them.
Pay Şengün.
Yeah.
Just pay Şengün. Yeah. Like, look, Jalen Green's very talented. I'm not falling for the Mickey Mouse March. Like, I'm just not. Like,
I know.
I'm a little bit higher on Jalen than like I'm not a Jalen hater by any stretch of the imagination. I've seen the talent. Like, he had a game against the Sixers 2 years ago where he was phenomenal, and I get the glimpses and the flashes, but like, well, they'll have another year to evaluate it. But like, how long do you wait for a guy that like? Realistically, even if he hits his ceiling, like what's the best case scenario? And I know you could make the argument, well, Şengün defensively is going to limit your ceiling and blah, 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 blah. Sabonis got traded for Halliburton. Like, I think that eventually maybe teams are just a little bit smarter now, but like a guy that's as historically productive as Şengün is and won an MVP before he even got to the NBA at age 18, success and production doesn't always look pretty. I mean, it's the same reason why you just put Zach Edey at the top of your board for this draft. Like, it doesn't always look the same. And maybe I'm just a little bit too like I've become a little bit too like production analytics pilled, and I haven't really thought about like the outcomes of like what his ceiling could potentially be. But like, I don't know, he's a really good player, and he's 21 still, and like
I agree
been
with
the
you.
best player on a team for 3 years and won an MVP before he got to the NBA.
Yeah. I agree with you. I also think that it is low key, maybe harder to trade Şengün than it would be Jalen Green, because in the same way most teams are committed at point guard, most teams are committed at center.
Right.
And so it's almost like you would need to wait for, I don't think Embiid is going to now, but like an Embiid or a Giannis, some other star big, so that you can just swap big for big and include other stuff. And then that's like a relatively clean swap. Whereas with Jalen Green, you might be able to find some teams who are like, this kid is clearly talented. We have a plan for him, whatever. If you're trying to go after some star wing. So,
all right. So in a year from now, when the Lakers blow it up, we'll get the Şengün for Anthony Davis slot. I'll be back on for that.
Oh, baby. That would be something else. That'd be something else. I don't think Clutch is ever going to let AD get out of LA, but
I don't think so either.
I will say, as one more, this is going to be very quick. One more quick team that I want to shout out. This is not so much matters for this next year, but I just think down the line, I want to shout the Miami Heat mostly because I think they've looked fantastic in Summer League. Now, Jaquez has played, which is a joke. He shouldn't be playing, but
weird.
Khalil Wares looked really, really good.
Yeah,
I thought that was a boom or bust pick, but like with real potential to boom when they drafted him. I had him 13th on my board, took him out of the top 10 at the last minute. Already regret doing that.
I had him 10, so I had him just on that cusp.
And they took my guy, Kashad Johnson, who everyone passed on, which made me furious. And like,
He's
getting
been awesome.
fired up right now.
And
it just, what it means is that I think we talked about this, maybe not. But a general formula that most teams, I think, try to follow, it's just hard to find the players, is to be as efficient on offense as you can while getting as much size as you can into your lineup. It's not necessarily finding defensive savants. It's just like getting positional size. And Ware and Kashad are that. Now, I think Kashad is a rotation player relatively early in his career because I'm very bullish on him. But the Heat, who've been, I think, hamstrung by their relative lack of size and playing Bam at the 5 so much, there's going to be stuff to figure out with him and Ware on the floor at the same time. Like I said, don't think it's going to be this year. But those are two guys that are going to help their size in a really meaningful way, because they still have Jaquez, who can probably scale down and play shooting guard because Jaquez is that gadgety and that good. And Jovic is a wing with size who's going to be part of their team. They'll have Butler for as long as Butler really wants to be there. And then all of their sort of players who have been overstretched, whether that's, Robinson or Hero, maybe Rozier, I don't know, Rozier will start for them this year. But you'll be able to intersperse those guys with a bit more intention, a bit more selectiveness, if you have this baseline of positional size up and down the spectrum. And I think Ware and Kashad give them a real chance to accomplish that in the next couple of years. So I wanted to shout them out.
Yeah, they're going to be a pain in the ass again. They always are.
Yeah. But now you got Caleb.
We did get Caleb, who I love his fit, and hopefully he can stay healthy. And my argument on the pro Caleb side was, and why I think people are underrating the pickup, is because I actually thought Miami's offensive context was terrible the last 2 years, and that Sixers offensive context for him is much better. And as much as it pains me to say, I think my guy Kelly Oubre might become the one that is a little bit more expendable here as we move forward, and they try to find that fifth starter because or fourth starter, and Caleb can be the ideal fifth starter that is the thing that keeps everything together.
Could be. I
We'll
could
see.
see, whatever. I think Philly, I kind of like that KJ Martin deal. I understand signing it for purposes of, trading it later. I get it. But I kind of just like KJ as a player. He's
He's gonna play for us, to be clear. Like, I think he'll be the
yeah.
backup 4 in the regular season to start the year.
And he doesn't have the dimensions that Derek Jones Jr. does. Like, he doesn't have that insane wingspan,
Yeah.
but he can defend pretty hard. So I think Philly's going to be very, very good, but we'll see if they really are one move away with the move will be.
Well,
Yeah.
well, we'll see. We'll see if Ricky Council could make Kelly Oubre even more expendable.
Thank you. Ricky went 3 for 15 tonight, which is
I know he went
unfortunate.
3 for 15, but he put up 7 threes, and that's all I give a shit about.
And he hit that logo 3. That's a shot of summer league, baby.
He's been shooting insane in summer. Like, yeah, you're gonna have your 0 for 7 nights from 3, but the nights where he's 3 of 6, it's electric. Like, I'm like, this is all I want, because he's gonna be spotting up more. He's working on the jumper. He's putting up the volume, and he will be, if he can ever get to the point where he's an average efficiency guy from 3, above average volume, he will be one of the 10 best guys at attacking closeouts in the NBA. He's incredible at attacking closeouts. So
he also has the athleticism to defend. That's what makes me so interested in him, is that he's always, whatever. He's that dog label is overused. But he has the athleticism to do it. And if he can legitimately guard multiple positions, then,
Nurse isn't going to trust him. He's just not the kind of player that coaches trust. But he's going to have games where he legitimately comes off the bench and wins it for us. Like, he did that already in his rookie season.
Best season Gary Trent Jr. ever had was under Nick Nurse, like weaponizing him as a weirdo gadget guy.
Same with Precious too.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah,
never know. All right, Trill. Anything else before I let you go? You need to.
No, I gotta go to bed. Yeah,
dude.
I gotta get out of here.
All right. Thank you for this odyssey. This was, I think, over 3 hours, which is
always. We love it.
Thank you all for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. Okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard. Start chucking. Thank you.